Number 12. Grimmauld Place didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. Not by people, not exactly. By old breath trapped in wallpaper. By years of anger sealed into floorboards. By the stubborn belief woven into every dark corner that the world outside the Black family was unworthy of entry. Hermione Granger stepped over the threshold, with her wand already lit, and immediately wished she didn't have lungs. The air tasted of damp velvet and stale ash. Rot, faint but persistent, clung to the back of her throat. Dust drifted through the weak afternoon light like slow snowfall, turning the entrance hall into something that belonged in a tomb rather than a home. Somewhere deeper inside, wood creaked. It didn't creak like an old house settling. It creaked like it was listening. Right then, Molly Weasley's voice cut through the silence with the force of a blade. All right, we have 3 days. 3. Dumbledore wants this place usable for order meetings by Friday, which means functional, not perfect. We are not polishing silver for a photograph. We're clearing curses, making space, and keeping everyone alive. She stood in the center of the hall like she belonged there, sleeves rolled, jaw set, already in motion. There were few things in the world more inevitable than Molly Weasley deciding a place would be cleaned. The house, Hermione suspected, was about to learn that inevitability had a cost. Hermione, drawing room. Fred, George, second-floor bedrooms. And I don't want to hear about anything you've found unless it's actively cursed. Fred's mouth opened, probably to say something about how defining actively cursed could be a fascinating debate, but he took one look at the hall and seemed to think better of it. Ron, you're with me in the kitchen. Ginny straightened. I want to help Hermione. Molly's lips thinned. Her eyes flicked, sharp and maternal, weighing safety against the stubborn set of her daughter's shoulders. Fine. Together. And if you find anything that feels wrong, you come get me immediately. Is that understood? A chorus of murmured yeses, subdued in a way Hermione wasn't used to hearing from the Weasleys, rippled through the hall. Even the twins were quieter than usual. The house had that effect. It didn't welcome. It tolerated. Hermione adjusted her grip on her wand. Molly's brisk authority helped, but it didn't erase the fact that the place felt like it could reach out and close a hand around your throat if you forgot to keep breathing. Where's Professor Lupin? Hermione asked. He'll be along shortly, Molly said, in a tone that shut the question down before it could grow. Now, move. They dispersed. Hermione and Ginny climbed the stairs to the first floor, steps groaning beneath them, as though the wood resented being asked to hold young feet. Portraits lined the walls, each covered with dust sheets, but Hermione could feel the eyes behind the fabric. There was a pressure to being watched even when you couldn't see the watcher. On the landing, one particularly large frame radiated a kind of focused hostility, as if it was angry at the very concept of footsteps. That'll be Sirius's mum, Ginny whispered. Dad said she's got a permanent sticking charm. They can't get her down. Hermione filed that away, her mind already pulling at it like a thread. A house where even portraits were prisoners. They turned towards the drawing room. The door opened with a reluctant sigh. Inside, the room was vast and gloomy, dominated by furniture that looked elegant in the way a knife was elegant. Heavy mahogany, cold silver accents, a chandelier that twisted like a serpent overhead, its glass droplets catching Hermione's wand light and throwing it back in sharp points. It's like it's trying to be beautiful and failing on purpose, Ginny said, voice low. Hermione didn't answer because she couldn't stop staring at the wallpaper. Dark, patterned, the sort of tasteful richness that belonged in old pure-blood houses. Except the pattern, once you looked too long, started to look like something else. Like vines. Like veins. All right, Hermione said, forcing herself into motion. Basics first. Dust and surfaces. But careful. This house is old. Everything's old. That means charm residue everywhere. She started with Scourgify, slow and deliberate, the wand movements precise. Ginny worked beside her, and Hermione noticed she was unusually quiet. Ginny Weasley could talk through a Quidditch match and a detention at the same time. Here, she seemed to be listening to the house, braced as though it might whisper something directly into her ear. Hermione cast a basic detection charm, the kind they'd practiced for hexes hidden on objects. The air shimmered faintly, and she felt the low hum of old magic embedded in the walls. No immediate curses, she said, but layered enchantments, wards, things that used to be protective and now just feel sour. Ginny nodded, like milk that's been left out too long. Exactly. They worked for 20 minutes. The room didn't get friendlier, but it got clearer. Dust retreated. The air changed slightly, as if the house was irritated by the very act of being made visible. Then Hermione noticed the cabinet. It stood against the far wall, half hidden behind a moth-eaten curtain. Unlike the other furniture, which was all formal menace, this piece was smaller, less imposing. Almost, the wood was lighter. The handles were brass rather than silver. Someone had carved initials into the side once, and someone else had tried to scratch them out so aggressively the surface was scarred. Ginny followed Hermione's gaze. Should we check inside? Hermione approached with her wand raised, every sense focused. She cast a curse detection charm, then another, more specific, then a third, just to be sure, because Grimmauld Place had already taught her that certainty was a luxury. Nothing. No hexes. No jinxes. No protective enchantments. It was odd. Objects in houses like this were usually protected the way certain families protected their secrets, with magic, with violence, with fear. The cabinet opened with a soft click. Inside, jumbled together without care, were the remnants of a childhood. Hermione's breath caught. A wooden dragon, one wing broken, the paint worn smooth, where small fingers had held it again and again. Tin soldiers in a battered box, their colors flaking, arranged not randomly, but as if someone had once lined them up carefully in private. A leather quaffle, deflated and cracked with age, expensive enough that it must have been a gift meant to display status rather than provide joy. And a stack of photographs. The edges were burned, not accidentally singed, burned away so precisely that faces had disappeared into black char. At the bottom lay a child's drawing of a house. Not this house, a smaller one, with a garden, with a sun drawn overhead, in determined, furious crayon strokes, as if the child had been willing brightness into existence by force of will, alone. Hermione's throat tightened so quickly she couldn't swallow. "These are Sirius's," Ginny said softly, like saying it too loud might wake something. Yes, Hermione managed. She lifted the dragon carefully. Someone had tried to repair the wing with tape, a clumsy fix that had failed long ago. It wasn't an adult's repair. It was the kind of desperate, hopeful patch a child did when they couldn't bear to throw something away. He must have kept them hidden, Ginny said. His family wouldn't have approved of anything fun. Anything normal, Hermione finished, and then hated how true it sounded. She set the dragon back down and reached for the photographs. Most were destroyed beyond recognition, but a few remained partially intact. Hermione's eyes narrowed as she studied the scorch patterns. In one, a young boy stood beside another child. The boy's posture was proud, chin tilted, shoulders squared. A grin had been there once, Hermione thought, because the shape of joy was visible in the angle of the cheekbones. But the face itself had been burned away, carefully, almost surgically. In another, the same boy sat on a broomstick, hair whipping, body angled forward in the way of someone who trusted flight. That face, too, had been removed. Why would he burn his own face? Ginny asked, frowning. That's horrible. Hermione's fingers tightened on the photograph. He didn't. She examined the edges again. The burn lines weren't chaotic. They weren't like accidental fire damage. They were targeted, controlled. Someone had wanted the boy erased. The air in the room seemed to thicken, as if the house approved. Someone else did this, Hermione said quietly. Someone who wanted him gone from the family story. A sound at the doorway made them both turn sharply. Creature stood there. He was barely 3 feet tall, skin stretched tight over bone, watery eyes fixed on the open cabinet. His bat-like ears trembled, and his stoop seemed to deepen, as if the sight of those objects pressed weight onto his spine. Blood traitors, he muttered. Filthy blood traitors, touching Master Sirius's things, disturbing what ought to stay hidden. Ginny stepped forward at once, wand raised. We're cleaning, creature, for the order. You'll show respect. The house elf's eyes flicked to Hermione, and his lip curled. The mudblood speaks, creature hissed. The mudblood thinks she has rights in the noble house of black. Touching, prying, Ginny's wand arm lifted higher. Say that again. Ginny, don't, Hermione said, and put a hand on her friend's forearm. Not because she feared Ginny couldn't handle him, but because something in Creature's voice wasn't only hatred. It was fear. His hands were trembling. Not with rage alone. With strain, Hermione looked at him properly, beyond the insult, beyond the reflexive prejudice trained into him by decades of service. Creature, she said quietly. These were Sirius's when he was a child. They're toys, memories. Should stay hidden, Creature hissed, his voice cracking. Should stay forgotten. Master Sirius wanted them forgotten. He left them. Left everything. Left Creature. For a heartbeat, the venom split and something raw showed through. Grief. Betrayal. A wound that had never healed, because house elves weren't built to survive abandonment. Then, Creature vanished with a sharp pop that echoed in the room. Silence rushed back in, heavier than before. Ginny's face was tight with anger. He's disgusting. Hermione stared at the cabinet. Her thoughts moved quickly, too quickly, as if trying to outrun a rising wave in her chest. Creature's reaction wasn't normal hatred. It was specific, protective. Like the cabinet was a nerve in the house, and they'd pressed too hard. These aren't just toys, Hermione said. Ginny blinked at her. What else would they be? Evidence, Hermione said, and surprised herself with the word. Evidence of what? Evidence of someone trying to erase him, Hermione said. Eyes on the burned photographs. Evidence that he had a childhood, and someone in this house decided he didn't deserve to keep even that. Ginny looked back into the cabinet, expression shifting as she understood what Hermione meant. So, what do we do? Tell Mum. Hermione hesitated. Molly Weasley would do what she always did when faced with broken things. She would try to make them safe, pack them away, store them, remove the danger, remove the mess, remove the pain from the surface so the work could continue. And practically, Molly was right. The Order needed a headquarters. They needed cursed objects removed and rooms cleared and meetings held. They didn't need emotional archaeology. But Hermione couldn't shake the feeling that these objects mattered in a way that didn't fit into Molly's categories of useful and not useful. The photographs in her hand felt like a plea, silent but insistent. Don't let me disappear. She thought of Harry, the fierce way he spoke about Sirius, the way his hope clung to him like a lifeline. Harry didn't know the shape of the cage Sirius had grown up in. None of them did. This house held answers to questions Harry didn't even know to ask. What did they do to you? What made you run? How much of your recklessness is courage, and how much is a survival instinct learned young? Hermione's chest tightened. We documented, she said finally. Ginny stared. Documented? Carefully, Hermione said. What we find, where we find it, condition, context, not for gossip, not to share, just so it's acknowledged, so it exists somewhere outside this cabinet before it gets shoved into a box and forgotten again. Ginny's mouth twisted. Mum wants this room finished today. I know, Hermione said, and pulled a spare bit of parchment and a self-inking quill from her beaded bag. But this isn't just stuff. It's a story somebody tried to burn out of existence. Ginny looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive. Fine. I'll keep cleaning. You write. Hermione sat on the floor beside the cabinet like a scholar in a ruin, but her hands were gentler than they'd ever been in the library. She wrote methodically. Wooden dragon, painted green, one wing broken. Signs of attempted repair using tape, worn smooth at the neck and tail from repeated handling. Tin soldiers, assorted sets, paint flaking, arranged in groups, suggests collection over years, hidden in cabinet rather than displayed. Leather quaffle, professional quality, likely expensive, deflated, and cracked. Contradicts typical black family disdain for common sport. Indicates either private interest or gift used as status symbol. Photographs. Multiple. Faces burned away with controlled flame. Targeted removal. Suggests deliberate erasure rather than accident. Child's drawing. House with garden. Sun overhead. Not Grimmauld Place. Indicates imagined refuge. Longing for normalcy. The words looked clinical on parchment, but each one carried weight. Hermione forced herself to examine every photograph long enough to describe what remained. A pattern emerged like a bruise under skin. Any image where Sirius looked joyful, any picture where he looked fully himself, those were the ones most thoroughly destroyed. She was so focused she didn't hear the footsteps until they were in the doorway. Remus Lupin appeared, looking tired in the way adults looked when sleep didn't help anymore. His robes were shabby even by his standards, and there were new lines around his eyes. But his smile, when it came, was still gentle. Hermione. Ginny. How's the cleaning going? Slow, Ginny said, casting a meaningful glance at Hermione's notes. Lupin stepped further into the room, and his gaze fell on the open cabinet. Something shifted in his face. Surprise first, then recognition, sharp as pain. I didn't know these were still here, he said quietly. He picked up the wooden dragon, turned it over in his scarred hands, as if the object could speak, and he knew how to listen. James gave him this, he said, voice soft. 5th year. Sirius mentioned once his family thought dragons were common, suitable for sport or breeding, not for friendship. He smiled, faint but real, at the memory. Sir James found the most common, cheerful-looking dragon toy he could, and left it on Sirius's bed with a note. For your common sensibilities. Hermione watched him cradle the broken wing, with an expression that looked dangerously like grief. Hermione swallowed. We found the photographs like this, faces burned out. Lupin's jaw tightened. His family burned most of them. And when he was 16, his mother did it herself. Hermione's quill paused mid-line. She burned his name off the tapestry, Lupin said, like he'd never existed. He looked at Hermione's notes. What are you doing with all this? Documenting, Hermione said, meeting his gaze. Before we pack it away, I thought someone should know it existed, should understand what happened here. Lupin's eyes softened. That's thoughtful of you. And probably painful. Is it wrong? Hermione asked, the question coming out smaller than she intended. To look through his things. He isn't here to say yes or no. Lupin held the dragon a moment longer, then set it down carefully, as if putting it away too quickly would be another kind of cruelty. Sirius left this place at 17 and never looked back, he said. He might have wanted it all forgotten. He touched the child's drawing of the sunny house. Then again, he hid them. He could have destroyed them himself. He didn't. Hermione felt the room spin slightly around that sentence. Footsteps sounded in the hall. Brisk, familiar. Molly Weasley entered like a weather front, full of momentum, then stopped when she saw the cabinet and the notes, and Lupin in the middle of it. What's this, then? Sirius's childhood belongings, Hermione said quickly. We found them in that cabinet. I was making notes before we packed them away properly. Molly frowned, and Hermione felt the temperature shift. Hermione, dear, Molly said, voice kind but firm. We're meant to be cleaning, not conducting research. I know, but these seemed... They're toys, Molly said, cutting in gently but decisively. Old toys from a difficult childhood. The kindest thing we can do is pack them away and let Sirius decide what he wants to do with them when he's ready. If he's ever ready. She looked at Lupin. Remus, surely you agree. Dumbledore needs the house functional by Friday. Lupin looked between them, torn. Molly, he began. Carefully, perhaps. Understanding is all very well, Molly said, and Hermione heard the frustration under the practicality. But we do not have time for this. There are still 3 floors to clear, curses to check, and a kitchen full of doxies. Hermione's fingers tightened on the parchment. The burnt photographs felt heavier than paper had any right to feel. I'll be quick, Hermione said quietly. Just let me finish the documentation. Half an hour. Then we'll pack everything properly, and I'll move on. Molly opened her mouth, likely to argue, then exhaled. Half an hour, Hermione. That's all. She left again, voice already echoing down the hall, calling orders, pushing momentum forward like it was the only thing keeping fear at bay. Lupin stayed. He watched Hermione return to her careful notes, and something like approval crossed his face. Thank you, he said simply, for caring enough to look. Hermione didn't answer. She couldn't trust her voice not to shake. She wrote again, hand moving steadily across parchment, recording what remained of a lost boy's broken things. Outside, the afternoon dimmed toward evening. Somewhere in the house, unseen, Creature watched from a hidden alcove, ancient eyes gleaming with something that might have been resentment, or might have been grief. Molly Weasley had cleaned her way through most of life's catastrophes. She had scrubbed cauldrons encrusted with failed potions, vanished stains whose origins she preferred not to imagine, and hauled gnomes out of the burrow's garden by the ankles, with the brisk competence of a woman who refused to be outlasted by dirt. Cleaning for Molly wasn't vanity. It was control. It was proof that chaos could be pushed back, that a home could be made safe with your own hands, that fear didn't get to have the last word if you kept moving. But Grimmauld Place didn't behave like a home. It resisted, not just with grime and neglect, though it had plenty of both, decades of it, settled into corners like sediment. Not just with cursed objects, though she'd already found 3 that had tried to bite, sting, or wrap themselves around her wrist with alarming enthusiasm. No, the hardest part was something Molly couldn't scour. The house didn't want to be cleaned. Every room seemed to tighten when she entered, shadows drawing back as though hoarding themselves. Every surface felt like it was hiding something on purpose. It wasn't only dirt, it was intent. Molly stood outside the drawing room on the second morning, arms full of supplies, and paused as voices drifted out. Clearly, a disciplinary implement, Hermione was saying. Look at the staining on the leather and these marks on the wall. They're at the height of a child, around 9 or 10. You think they beat him? Ginny's voice was tight, furious. I think someone in this house believed in corporal punishment. And given where we found this trunk, hidden in what seems to be his room, Molly's stomach clenched. She pushed the door open, perhaps more forcefully than necessary. Both girls looked up, startled. They were kneeling on the floor beside an overturned trunk, surrounded by objects that made Molly's chest go tight. More childhood remnants. More evidence. Hermione's parchment lay spread beside her like a map of grief, covered in neat handwriting and small sketches. Still documenting, Molly said. There was an edge in her voice she didn't entirely recognize as her own. Hermione flushed. Mrs. Weasley, I know you said to move on, but we found this trunk under the floorboards and you decided your research was more important than the work we came here to do, Molly finished. She set down her supplies with a decisive thud that made the dust jump. Hermione, dear, I gave you half an hour yesterday. That was meant to be the end of it. But we're finding things that matter, Ginny started. We're finding painful reminders of a painful past, Molly interrupted, and heard the sharpness. She didn't soften it. She couldn't. Not right now. Not with the clock ticking and the war outside these walls, and Dumbledore expecting a headquarters by Friday. Do you understand what's at stake here? Dumbledore needs a secure place for Order meetings. The Order needs a functional base. What we do not need is a museum dedicated to Sirius Black's traumatic childhood. Hermione stood, clutching her notes as if someone might take them away. With respect, Mrs. Weasley, I think understanding what happened to Sirius here might help us understand him better. Help Harry understand him better. Harry doesn't need to know every terrible thing that happened to his godfather. Molly felt her voice rising and forced it down. Sometimes, the kindest thing we can do is leave the past buried. Some stones are better left unturned. Even if they're still hurting him, Hermione challenged. Even if he's carrying all of this without anyone understanding why. Especially then, Molly said, surprising herself with the vehemence. Both girls stared at her. She took a breath, chose her words more carefully. Sirius has suffered enough. The last thing he needs is people digging through his childhood without his permission, making him relive every cruelty his family inflicted. Can't you see? This. She gestured at the scattered objects, at the careful notes. This is a violation. It's bearing witness, Hermione said quietly. There's a difference. Is there? Molly asked, and the words came sharper than she intended. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're satisfying your own curiosity at the expense of someone's privacy. Hermione flinched as if struck. Ginny stepped closer to her friend instinctively, protective. Mum, that's not fair. Fair or not, it's true, Molly said, then softened because she wasn't cruel. She wasn't. Hermione, I know your heart's in the right place. You want to help. But the way to help Sirius is not by cataloguing every injury he suffered. It's by making this house clean and safe, so he has one less thing to worry about. So he can be here without being forced to stare at what it used to be. You can't clean away history, Hermione said. No, Molly agreed, but you can choose not to live inside it. She knelt beside the trunk, began placing objects back inside with brisk, practiced movements. She did it gently, because even anger didn't make her rough with children's things. These should be packed away properly, stored somewhere Sirius can reach if he chooses, not left scattered about like an exhibit. What if we're meant to find them? Ginny asked suddenly. What if there's something here he needs us to know? Then he'll tell us himself when he's ready, Molly said, closing the trunk with a firm snap. Until then, we respect his privacy and we do the work we came here to do. Is that understood? Hermione held Molly's gaze for a long moment, then bent to gather her notes. Understood, she said, but something in her tone suggested it wasn't. Not really. The day moved forward, tense as a drawn bowstring. Molly put Hermione and Ginny on tasks far from trunks and cabinets. Woodwork, curtains, surface cleaning, rooms with fewer hiding places. She herself tackled the ground floor, working with the sharp efficiency of someone trying to outrun a thought. She wasn't a callous woman. She knew that, but she also knew from experience that some wounds healed best when left alone. Arthur had nightmares sometimes, after a difficult day at the ministry, nightmares that made him wake sweating and silent, eyes fixed on nothing. When Molly asked what he'd dreamed, he would shake his head and say nothing. And she learned over the years that he didn't want analysis or sympathy in those moments. He wanted breakfast cooked normally, wanted the children bickering at the table, wanted the world to go on. Normality was healing. Routine was healing. And maybe Sirius needed that too. Not pity, not excavation, not people staring at him with soft, sad eyes. Maybe he needed a place he could walk into without having his past flung at him like a curse. Molly was wrestling with a suit of armor in the entrance hall when Remus Lupin arrived. He stopped just inside the threshold, eyes scanning the transformation. Dust cleared, floors visible, the worst of the grime banished. "You've made remarkable progress," he said. "We're here to work, not to sightsee," Molly replied, snapping her wand to vanish rust from the armor's joints, with perhaps more force than necessary. Remus's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Is something wrong? Nothing discipline won't solve." She straightened, wiped her hands on her apron, and decided it was better to say it than to let it simmer. "Remus, I need you to speak with Hermione. She's distracted. She's documenting Sirius's childhood belongings. I told her to focus on the cleaning, but she seems to think cataloging every painful object in this house is more important than the actual work." Remus's expression shifted. Careful. Thoughtful. "I see. Do you?" Molly challenged. "Because I'm not sure she does. This isn't research, Remus. This is someone's private pain. We have no right to go digging through it." "Is that what you think she's doing? Digging? Satisfying curiosity," Molly said firmly. "Hermione's brilliant. She sees a mystery and she wants to solve it. But Sirius Black is not a mystery to be solved. He's a man who suffered enough without us turning his childhood into a project." Remus was quiet for a moment, then said gently, "Molly, may I show you something?" He led her up the stairs to the first-floor landing. Molly had passed the covered portrait there several times. A large frame, heavy and ornate, draped in a dust sheet like a shroud. Remus reached out and pulled the sheet away. The frame held a tapestry. Calling it a tapestry felt too polite. It was a family tree rendered in gold thread on black fabric, names blazing in elaborate script, connected by delicate lines of ancestry. The Blacks. Generations of them, stretching back like a declaration. And in the middle of it, on a lower branch, there was a scorch mark. A name had been burned away so thoroughly that only blackened threads remained. The fabric around it was melted, as if the tapestry itself had cried out when it happened. Molly stared, feeling something cold settle in her stomach. "His mother did this," Remus said quietly, "when he was 16. She blasted his name out of the family history." Molly's eyes tracked the branch. Orion Black, Wahlberger Black, Regulus Black. And where Sirius should have been, nothing, ash. "And here," Remus continued, pointing to other scorch marks scattered across the tapestry, "is Andromeda, burned away for marrying a Muggle-born. Here's Alfred, disowned for leaving family money. Here's Cedrella, burned away for marrying a Weasley. Your husband's great-aunt. Molly's throat tightened. I know the story. Then you know this isn't ancient history, Remus said. This is what Sirius lived with. A family so devoted to blood purity, they erased anyone who disagreed. They tried to erase him. He covered the tapestry again, but gently, as though even the destroyed version deserved care. Hermione isn't documenting out of curiosity, Molly. She's documenting out of compassion. Because someone should acknowledge what happened here. Someone should be able to say, clearly, this was wrong. Molly swallowed hard, furious at the prickle of tears. She blinked them away. But what good does it do? She asked, and her voice sounded smaller than she wanted. How does knowing every detail help him now? I don't know that it helps him, Remus admitted, but I think it might help us. Help Harry. Help anyone trying to understand why Sirius is the way he is. Reckless and loyal and terrified of confinement and desperate to prove himself. He's carrying all of this whether we name it or not. It still feels like a violation, Molly said. It might be, Remus agreed. But so was what they did to him. At least our violation comes from care. They stood there in silence, the covered tapestry looming like a monument to casual cruelty. Molly rubbed her eyes with the heel of her hand, annoyed at herself for needing to do it. I'm trying to protect him, she said finally. I know, Remus said, voice kind. But sometimes protection looks like control. And sometimes the best thing we can do for someone is trust them to decide what they can handle, even if that means trusting others to carry some of it quietly. You're saying I should let Hermione continue. I'm saying shutting down every attempt to understand might do more harm than good, Remus said. She's being careful, Molly, respectful. She's not gossiping or treating it lightly. She's acknowledging. Molly thought of Hermione's neat handwriting, of the careful way she'd held the broken dragon, of Ginny's anger at the sight of cruelty. They weren't being cruel. They were witnessing cruelty. But witnessing had a cost too. What if Sirius doesn't want us to know? Molly asked. Then we keep it to ourselves, Remus said simply. But we'll know, and knowing might help us help him when he needs it, if he needs it. Molly closed her eyes. She thought of her own children, each with private hurt she couldn't always reach. Fred and George using humor like armor. Percy hiding behind rules. Ron swallowing insecurity and calling it loyalty. Ginny burning with quiet fury when she felt powerless. She couldn't fix them by pretending their pain didn't exist. Maybe she couldn't fix Sirius that way either. All right, Molly said at last. Hermione can continue. Carefully, quietly. But you supervise. And if what she finds is too private, too painful, we stop and pack it away. Remus nodded. Agreed. She let out a slow breath. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like surrendering to a risk she didn't know how to measure. They found Hermione and Ginny in a second-floor bedroom, cleaning woodwork as ordered. Both looked up wearily when Molly entered, bracing for a lecture. Hermione, Molly said, and her voice was gentler now. I owe you an apology. Hermione blinked. Mrs. Weasley, let me finish, Molly said, sitting on the edge of a dusty bed. I was harsh earlier, not entirely fair. I still think we must be careful. This is Sirius's private history, and we're intruding without his permission. But Remus helped me understand that perhaps some intrusions come from care rather than curiosity. And I believe yours does. It does, Hermione said softly, and her shoulders loosened a fraction. So, here's what we'll do, Molly continued. You may continue documenting what you find, but only with Remus present. He can provide context and guidance. Nothing goes beyond this house, or the people currently in it. We keep Sirius's privacy as much as we can while acknowledging what happened here. Does that seem reasonable? Hermione's smile was tentative but real. Very reasonable. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Molly said, standing. This is still a working operation. The Order needs this house functional. So you'll balance your interests with actual cleaning, and you check with me before going into any new areas. Understood, Hermione said. Good. Molly moved toward the door, then paused, hand on the frame. Hermione, what you said before about bearing witness, it was well put. Just remember, bearing witness carries responsibility. What we learn here, we may carry for the rest of our lives. Make sure you're ready for that weight. Hermione met her gaze without flinching. I am. Molly wasn't sure anyone could be, but she nodded anyway. As she descended the stairs, she heard Hermione and Ginny's voices resume behind her. Quieter now, more careful. Remus would join them soon to supervise whatever they found. Molly returned to her work, the simple, honest labor of making one room after another safe. But the burned tapestry lingered in her mind, all those erased names, all that casual destruction, and the question she couldn't shake, no matter how hard she scrubbed. If someone could burn a child out of history, what else had they hidden in the dark? Remus Lupin had always been good at waiting. It was a skill learned young and sharpened by necessity. Waiting for the moon to wane, waiting for doors to open that might never open, waiting for people to decide whether his condition mattered more than his character. He had spent most of his life in a careful posture of patience, watching, listening, choosing when it was safe to step forward. Grimmauld Place tested even that patience. The house revealed itself slowly, as though it resented being understood. It offered up information the way an unwilling witness offered testimony, in fragments, under pressure, and only when it had no other choice. Each day they cleaned, the physical grime lifted, and beneath it something else emerged, something harder to name. History, yes, but also pattern. The way the hallway corners narrowed like they were designed to funnel people into specific rooms. The way certain doors were heavier than others, as if built to resist opening. The way the air changed by floor, warmer on the ground level where visitors would be received, colder above where private life had happened. Remus found himself noticing details he wished he could stop noticing. A faint handprint, small and smudged, on a windowsill that had been sheltered from dust as if someone once pressed their palm there again and again. Scratches on a doorframe marking height in careful increments, as though a child had stood with his back to the wood and measured himself in secret, because no one else cared enough to measure him aloud. A cluster of Muggle coins hidden behind loose wallpaper, a tiny hoard of contraband that spoke of curiosity punished into secrecy. And always the presence of creature. The house elf appeared at the edges of rooms, then vanished before anyone could properly address him. Each time Remus saw him, the same muttered insults poured out in a hoarse stream: blood traitors, filth, half-breed, mudblood. The words sounded rehearsed, inherited, as though creature had been taught them the way other creatures were taught songs. But beneath the hatred, Remus kept sensing something else. Strain, fear, as if the insults were the only thing holding a deeper panic in place. It was the afternoon of their third day at Grimmauld Place, when the house finally gave them something that made Remus stop pretending the past was safely past. Hermione found the door. It was tucked at the end of a short corridor on the second floor, the kind of corridor that might have once been decorative, but now felt like a throat. The door itself was smaller than the others, almost modest, and the wood around the handle was worn in a way that suggested frequent use by hands that were not adult-sized. Hermione paused with her wand raised, eyes narrowed. "This feels concentrated," she said, "like the magic in the wood has been layered for years." Ginny leaned close. "Smells weird, too." Molly had used the word sour earlier, and Remus thought it fit. The air around certain parts of the house had a sourness to it, a quality like old fruit. Not rotten, exactly, more like something that had been preserved too long, until preservation itself became a kind of decay. Remus nodded toward Hermione. Go on, carefully. Hermione cast detection charms, and the door shimmered faintly in response. Not a curse, not a trap, but the residue of repeated wards placed and replaced. A habit rather than a singular act. She opened it slowly. Inside was a schoolroom. It was small, no larger than a cupboard-sized study, but arranged with strict precision. A child-sized desk bolted to the floor, a narrow chair, shelves of books lined up so neatly they could have been measured with a ruler. A blackboard on the far wall still held faint traces of chalk, the ghost of handwriting exercises repeated until the hand stopped shaking and became obedient. Ginny's breath caught. They taught him here. Before Hogwarts, Hermione said, running her fingertips along the spines of the books. Look at these titles. Remus stepped closer, reading over her shoulder. Noble Heritage, a guide for young wizards of breeding. Blood and Destiny, the Sacred 28. Proper Conduct in the Ancient Houses, a primer on purity and power. Remus felt something cold settle under his ribs. Standard black family education, he said quietly. Hermione's mouth tightened. It's indoctrination. Yes, Remus agreed. And for children, indoctrination and education can look identical from the outside. The difference is whether questions are allowed. He pulled one book from the shelf. The pages smelled old and sharp. At first glance, the text was exactly what he expected. Lofty sentences about duty and tradition and the dangers of contamination. Then Remus noticed the margin. In small, defiant handwriting, young but already controlled, someone had written a single line. This is rubbish. Remus stared, then turned another page. More notes. Tiny rebellions pressed between paragraphs like wildflowers growing through stone. Mother says muggles are stupid. James says they made planes. Planes are more impressive than mother. Remus's throat tightened in a way he didn't entirely understand until he realized he was smiling. Even then, he murmured, he was resisting. Hermione looked at him, eyes bright with something like vindication and grief braided together. He always was. Ginny circled the room, gaze sweeping, as if searching for the shape of a child who used to sit here. She stopped near the corner where a narrow cupboard door was half hidden behind a hanging cloak that smelled faintly of mothballs. "What's this?" she asked, and reached for the handle. Remus's body reacted before his mind did. Wait. But Ginny had already pulled it open. It wasn't a cupboard for storage. It was a narrow space, barely wide enough for a child to stand upright. The inside of the door was scarred with scratches, shallow at first, then deeper towards the bottom, as if the person inside had started with fingernails, and then, when nails broke or pain made them useless, used whatever they could find. A button, a ring, a sharp edge of something small and desperate. Ginny froze, face draining of color. Hermione stepped forward, wand light trembling slightly as it illuminated the interior. "No," she whispered. "No." Remus felt the room tilt. "A punishment cupboard," he said, voice low. "A place designed to hurt, without leaving bruises anyone outside the family would see. A place designed to teach a child that walls were not something you were allowed to question." Hermione ran her fingers over the scratches without touching them, eyes following the lines. "How long?" Remus swallowed. "I don't know. Long enough to leave marks like this." Ginny's voice came out harsh. "This isn't discipline." "No," Remus agreed. "It's cruelty." Hermione turned toward the bookshelf again, like her mind needed facts to keep itself from breaking. "These families always talk about tradition as if it's noble. They call it discipline. But," she gestured at the cupboard, "this is how you break someone." Remus closed the cupboard door gently, as though the child inside might still be there, still counting minutes by scratching them into wood. He thought of Sirius at 11, trying to imagine a future where he wasn't trapped. Thought of Sirius at 16, burned out of the tapestry. Thought of the man now, 33, who reacted to confinement with a wildness that made people call him reckless, as if it was a choice rather than a reflex. Footsteps sounded in the doorway. Not human footsteps. Too light, too quick. Creature stood there, ears pressed flat against his skull, eyes fixed on the cupboard. His entire body trembled, and for the first time since Remus had known him, Creature didn't look merely hateful. He looked terrified. "You should not be here," Creature hissed. "Should not be touching. Should not be looking." "We're cleaning," Hermione said softly, as if gentleness could soothe the creature trained on cruelty. "Just cleaning." "Lies," Creature spat, and his voice rose to a shriek so sharp it made Ginny flinch. The mudblood's eyes. "She's not cleaning. She's searching. She's finding. Too much finding." He clutched at his tea towel garment and began striking himself in agitation, muttering between blows, as if reciting a punishment script. Bad Creature. Bad. Talking. Letting secrets slip. Mistress said. Mistress commanded. Remus took a step forward, hand out, palm open in the universal gesture of non-threat. "Creature," he said calmly, "what did your mistress command?" The house elf's eyes went wide, horror flooding his face, as if he hadn't meant to speak at all. He clapped his hands over his mouth. His shoulders shook. Then he vanished with a crack that echoed through the schoolroom, like the slam of a door. Silence dropped. Ginny's breathing sounded too loud. Hermione turned toward Remus, eyes sharp. "He's not just angry." "No," Remus said. "He's frightened." "Frightened of what we'll find," Ginny said, voice tight. "Or frightened of what he's been ordered to protect," Hermione finished. Remus looked at the cupboard again, then at the shelves of indoctrination books. It wasn't hard to imagine Wahlburger Black giving orders in this room, voice cold and certain, teaching a child to hate, to obey, to hide. House elves can be bound by orders even after a master's death, Remus said slowly. If Wahlburger commanded Creature to keep something hidden, he would have no choice but to obey. Not even if it distressed him. "So there's something else here," Hermione said, and her mind was already moving, connecting dots with ruthless speed. "Something he's guarding." Ginny crossed her arms hard across her chest. "Something worse than this?" Remus didn't answer, because he didn't know. He didn't want to know. And yet, the weight of responsibility settled, unavoidable. If Creature was guarding something, it could be personal, painful, private, or it could be dangerous. "Molly will want to know," Remus said finally. Hermione hesitated. "She already thinks we've crossed lines." "We have crossed lines," Remus said, "but the ward doesn't care about our ethics. If there is something in this house that can endanger the order, we need to identify it." Ginny's eyes flashed. "So we keep searching." Remus held her gaze. "We keep cleaning," he corrected gently. "The searching has to stay within the work. That's the only justification we have." Hermione looked like she wanted to argue, but she swallowed it. Her voice came out steady. "All right. So we continue carefully. We pay attention to what upsets him most. We note where his fear spikes." Remus nodded. "Exactly. Creature is our indicator, not because we want to torment him, but because his reactions will tell us where the pressure points are." They finished the schoolroom in silence, moving through the tasks with renewed focus. Hermione cleaned the blackboard, but she left the faintest impression of one line of controlled handwriting behind, as if erasing it entirely felt like erasing the child who'd written it. Ginny worked on the shelves, hands rougher than usual as anger gave her energy. When she finished, she stood back and stared at the punishment cupboard door. "If Sirius ever comes back here," she said quietly, Will he even be able to breathe? Remus didn't know how to answer. He settled for truth. He'll pretend he can, he said, because he always has. They moved next to an adjacent room that looked like a guest bedroom, impersonal and stiff. The bedspread was heavy. The curtains were thick. The air was stale. Nothing about it suggested comfort. And yet, even here, Sirius's presence appeared like a fingerprint. Ginny found a book under the bed, not a pure-blood tome, not a family-approved text, a battered Muggle adventure story with a torn cover. She held it up like evidence. He hid these everywhere, she said, amazement and anger mixing in her tone, like a prisoner hiding contraband. Hermione found another behind a loose floorboard, a book about explorers, sea voyages, maps. Remus felt something in his chest twist. Sirius had always loved the idea of escape, even as a boy, not just leaving the house, but leaving the world that house represented. Then Hermione found the letters. They were tucked behind a panel at the back of a wardrobe, bundled together with twine. The handwriting on the envelopes was unmistakable. James Potter. Remus reached for them before he could stop himself. His fingers trembled slightly as he untied the bundle. The first letter was dated late August, before first year. Sirius, can't stop thinking about the robe shop. You looked like you were about to bite someone's head off, and I respect that. Hogwarts is going to be brilliant. Houses don't matter except for Quidditch. And whether you're fun, don't let anyone tell you different. See you on the train. James. Remus exhaled through his nose, a sound that was almost a laugh and almost grief. James had done that, had written like the world was already kind, and by writing it that way, he made it closer to true. Ginny leaned over his shoulder, eyes narrowing as she read. He was 11, she said softly. James was 11, and he wrote like that. James always wrote like that, Remus said, like friendship was inevitable, like you didn't need to earn it. Hermione turned a page. Another letter, a few weeks into term. Sirius, sorting was ridiculous. I told the hat it could shove its categories. It tried to argue. I argued back. I think it got tired. I'm in Gryffindor. You better not end up in Slytherin, or I'll come drag you out myself. Also, there's a library. Like, a real one. You'll love it. Don't pretend you won't. James. Hermione's throat worked. The warmth of the letters hit like sunlight in a place that didn't deserve it. These are, she began, then stopped, because she didn't have a word that could carry what she meant. Proof, Ginny said. Yes, Hermione whispered. Proof he wasn't alone. Remus looked at the bundle, at the years of ink and paper, at the way Sirius had hidden them like treasure, and then he heard Molly's voice in his head again. Trauma is not treasure. But these letters weren't trauma. They were lifelines. They were the opposite of what the house wanted. They were evidence that the house didn't win completely. Footsteps sounded in the corridor again, this time heavier, human. Molly appeared in the doorway, expression set, eyes scanning the room quickly. The clean surfaces, the open wardrobe, the letters in Remus's hands. Her gaze narrowed, but she didn't explode. Not anymore. There was something in her posture that suggested she was trying to hold two truths at once, that this mattered, and that they still had a deadline. What have you found? She asked. Remus held up the letters. James. Molly's face softened despite herself. She stepped closer, took one, read the first lines, and her mouth tightened. Merlin, she muttered, and the swear sounded like prayer. Hermione watched Molly carefully. She'd expected another argument, another push to pack everything away. Instead, Molly's eyes flicked around the room, landing on the hidden panel in the wardrobe, then on the books under the bed, then on the punishment cupboard they'd found in the schoolroom. You see, Hermione said quietly, unable to stop herself. You see why I wanted to document. This house tried to erase him, but he hid pieces of himself anyway, pieces that mattered. Molly looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Remus, and something in her face hardened, not against Hermione, but against the house. We pack these properly, Molly said finally. Not because we're burying them, because we're protecting them. There's a difference. Hermione nodded, relieved and unsettled at the same time. She understood the distinction. She just wasn't sure it would hold. Ginny's eyes flashed toward the doorway, as if she half expected Creature to appear again and snatch the bundle from their hands. He won't, Remus said, reading her expression. He can't. Not if Sirius is master. Molly's voice lowered. Remus, we need to talk about Creature. Remus felt his stomach tighten. In private, now, Molly said, and turned back into the corridor. Remus followed her into the hall. The house felt colder outside the room, as if it resented what they'd found. Molly didn't waste time. He was in the kitchen earlier, she said. Creature, he was, grieving, pulling at his ears, muttering about failing his mistress, about secrets exposed, about shame. Then he screamed at me and vanished. Remus nodded slowly. I saw him in the schoolroom. He panicked when we opened the punishment cupboard. He said something about his mistress commanding him to keep things hidden. Molly's jaw tightened. Do you think he'd hurt someone? Remus thought of house elf magic. Powerful, strange, bound by rules that weren't always visible from the outside. He can't hurt Sirius's guests directly, he said carefully. But he can hide things, mislead, lock doors. And what? Molly pressed. And he could tell someone, Remus admitted. Molly's eyes sharpened. Exactly. He served this family for decades. He might know Death Eaters, might know how to contact them. He's bound to Sirius, Remus said. But even as he spoke, he felt the weakness in it. Bound how? By what rules? And how many loopholes existed in the twisted logic of old magic? Molly's voice was urgent now. We can't risk it. This house is going to be full of Order members. People will be coming and going. If Creature is loyal to Wahlberger's commands over Sirius's authority, if he's protecting something and panicking, Remus, that's a security risk. Remus exhaled. You're right. Molly's eyes narrowed slightly, surprised by his immediate agreement. We tell Dumbledore, she said. Remus hesitated. And what do we tell him? That Creature is upset? That he's hiding something? Dumbledore will want specifics. He'll want a plan. Then find out what he's hiding, Molly said sharply. Talk to him. Push. Use authority if you must. Remus's spine stiffened. I'm not going to Legilimens, a house elf. Molly's eyebrows rose. And what we're doing to Sirius's privacy isn't invasive? The words hit clean. Remus went still. Molly didn't look triumphant. She looked exhausted, like she hated having to say it. We've been willing to violate one kind of boundary, she continued. Quieter now. We've been reading letters, opening trunks, walking through a man's childhood like it's a place we have a right to enter. But when it comes to the house elf who might get people killed, suddenly we're precious about ethics? Remus swallowed. You're right, he said again, and meant it. Molly's shoulders dropped slightly, tension releasing. So what do we do? Remus stared at the wallpaper, at a faint pattern that looked too much like vines and veins. He thought of Creature's panic, the words he'd muttered, secret room sealed. Never let anyone enter. Never let the shame be exposed. Shame. In the Black family, shame could mean anything. A muggle object, a kindness, a weakness, a secret relationship, an act of rebellion, or something darker. We don't force it from him, Remus said finally. Not yet. If we compel him, we'll push him into desperation, and desperate house elves are unpredictable. Molly's mouth tightened. That's not reassuring. No, Remus agreed. But it's safer than making him feel cornered. So we wait, Molly said, disbelieving. We watch, Remus corrected. We continue cleaning. We note where he appears, what rooms he haunts, what discoveries spike his panic, and we prepare for the possibility that he's guarding something significant. Molly looked at him like she wanted to argue, then looked away first, because she was practical enough to know when arguing didn't produce a better plan. Fine, she said. But if he slips again, if he gives us another clue, we act. We don't ignore it because we're tired. Agreed, Remus said. They returned to Hermione and Ginny, who were carefully rebundling James's letters. Hermione's hands moved like she was handling glass. Remus told Hermione what Molly had said, told her about the security risk, about the need to pay attention to Creature's panic. Hermione's expression sharpened instantly. Then there is something else here. Probably, Remus said. Something Creature thinks would dishonor the house, Ginny added, voice low. Or something Wahlberger thought was shameful, Hermione said, and her eyes gleamed with the dangerous light of a mind that loved puzzles, even when the puzzle was made of pain. Molly cut in, firm, and whatever it is, we are not tearing this house apart looking for it. We finish the work. We don't go hunting. Hermione's jaw tightened. With respect, Mrs. Weasley, if there is something hidden here that could endanger the Order, ignoring it would be irresponsible. Molly held her gaze. Then we find it as part of the work. Not because you can't resist a mystery. Hermione looked like she wanted to argue, but Remus spoke first. Molly's right, Hermione. If we start searching out of obsession, we'll lose our judgment. We stay anchored to necessity. Hermione exhaled slowly. All right, necessity. But Remus could see it in her posture. She'd already started building a map in her mind of the house's secrets. That night, Remus stayed at Grimmauld Place. The Order wasn't officially using it yet, but Dumbledore had left supplies there, and Remus didn't like the idea of the house sitting empty with wards shifting, and Creature panicking alone in the dark. He told himself it was strategy. Really, it was unease. Sleep came in fragments. The mattress in the guest room was lumpy, and the house made sounds that felt too intentional to be wind. Once, Remus woke convinced he'd heard a child crying. He got up, wand in hand, and walked the corridors. He found nothing, only cold air, only the faintest smell of dust and old anger, only the sense of being watched. Dawn came grey through grimy windows. Remus made tea in the kitchen and noted absently that the counters were spotless, arranged with obsessive precision. Creature had been there before him, had cleaned, perhaps, as a way of coping, as a way of proving he still had value. But the house elf was nowhere to be seen. Molly arrived early, letting herself in with Dumbledore's key. She looked tired but determined. Last day, she said, taking the tea Remus offered, we finished the remaining bedrooms, and that's it. No attic, no extra. Remus nodded. Agreed. He hesitated, though the question of Creature remains. As if summoned by his name, Creature appeared in the doorway, but something was different. His usual hostility was muted, replaced by agitation that bordered on panic. His ears twitched violently. His gnarled hands clutched his tea towel so tightly the fabric twisted. Master Sirius's room, he muttered. They've been in Master Sirius's room, touching, prying, disturbing what ought to stay closed. We've been careful, Creature, Molly said, voice firm but not cruel. We're cleaning, as ordered. Not cleaning, Creature hissed. Looking, searching. Too close to what must stay hidden, Mistress said. Mistress commanded. Keep the secret room sealed, creature. Never let anyone enter. Never let the shame be exposed. Remus set his tea down very carefully. What room, creature? He asked, and kept his voice low, gentle, as if speaking softly might keep the house elf from shattering. Creature froze. His eyes widened with horror, as if he hadn't meant to speak at all. Then he began striking himself on the head with both fists, rapid and frantic. Bad, creature. Bad. Telling secrets. Breaking commands. Bad. Stop that, Remus said sharply, stepping forward. But creature vanished with a crack before Remus could reach him. Molly and Remus stared at the empty doorway. A sealed room, Molly said slowly. Something Wahlberger Black wanted hidden, Remus added. Something she called shame, Molly finished, and the word hung in the air like smoke. They didn't need to say Hermione's name aloud. They found her and Ginny already at work in Sirius's childhood bedroom, wiping down woodwork and stripping dusty linens. Hermione looked up at once, reading their expressions. What happened? Creature slipped. Remus said, "There's a sealed room." Wahlberger commanded him to keep it hidden. He called it shame. Hermione went very still, then very bright, like a lantern being lit. A sealed room, she echoed. Molly's voice cut in. We are not breaking into anything. We are noting. We are being cautious. We are dealing with a security risk, Hermione said, and for once her tone was as practical as Molly's. If there is a hidden room in this house tied to old black magic, we need to know what it is, not out of curiosity, out of safety. Ginny nodded slowly, and because Creature is terrified. Remus glanced at the wall beside the bookshelf. The paneling there looked ordinary. That's what hidden things depended on. Ordinary. We look for irregularities, Remus said. Places where the architecture doesn't quite match. Hidden doors often leave inconsistencies. They began methodically. Hermione ran detection charms. Ginny tapped along the walls, listening for hollowness. Molly measured the dimensions of the room against the rough floor plan they'd sketched earlier in the week, lips moving as she counted steps. Remus watched. He let his instincts guide him, the quiet observational skill he'd honed across a lifetime of listening for danger. It was Hermione who found it first. Here, she said, pointing to a section of wall beside the bookshelf. This panel is newer than the others. See how the wood grain doesn't match? And there's concentrated magic here. Old. Deliberate. Remus stepped close, extended his senses. She was right. Beneath the panel was a ward, not aggressive, not defensive in the obvious way, but closed, locked from the inside. Can you open it? Molly asked, voice tight. Hermione tried the usual unlocking charm. Nothing. Then another. Nothing. Then one more frustration sharpening her movements. Still nothing. It's bloodlocked, Remus said, recognizing the quality of resistance. It requires black family blood to open. Ginny stared. Sirius sealed it, or Wahlberger did. Molly said. Hermione's eyes narrowed, or Sirius was forced to comply. They stood in silence, staring at the innocent panel, knowing that behind it there was something that had been kept hidden for decades. This is a threshold, Remus said quietly. Once we cross it, we can't uncross it. Hermione's voice came out tight. And if we don't cross it, we may never know what Creature was ordered to hide. Molly's jaw hardened. And if we do cross it, we violate someone's explicit boundary. 4 pairs of eyes fixed on the panel. Behind it, there could be anything. A cache of dark objects. A childhood sanctuary. A shame Wahlberger feared. A vulnerability Sirius couldn't bear to let anyone see. The house creaked softly, as if amused by their hesitation. And Remus realized, with a cold clarity, that this choice would not feel clean no matter what they did. For a long moment, none of them moved. The panel in the wall looked ordinary enough now that they'd found it, which was almost insulting. It was the kind of ordinary that existed on purpose, designed to make you doubt your own eyes. If Hermione hadn't pointed out the grain mismatch, if Remus hadn't felt the ward humming behind it, they could have cleaned this entire room twice over and never known they were standing inches from a secret. Ginny broke the silence first, voice low. If it's bloodlocked, we can't open it. Not properly. Molly's reply came immediately, firm and final. Then we don't open it. Hermione turned toward her as if she'd been waiting for exactly this and had rehearsed the counter-argument in her head for hours. That's convenient, she said sharply. The moment we find something that might actually matter, we suddenly become very respectful of boundaries. Molly's eyes flashed. Don't do that. Don't do what? Hermione demanded. Don't point out that you keep drawing the line exactly where it's comfortable for you. Molly's shoulders squared. The line is where Sirius drew it. He bloodlocked it. That's not comfort, Hermione. That's consent. Consent from a 17-year-old boy trapped in an abusive home, Hermione shot back. Consent under coercion isn't consent. Remus felt the argument tighten like a knot in the air. He had spent the last 3 days watching these two women circle the same truth from opposite angles. Molly wanted to protect Sirius by moving forward. Hermione wanted to protect him by understanding what had happened to him. Both were trying, in their own ways, not to become the kind of people who used someone's pain as a tool. And now the house had offered them a door that forced the question into a shape they couldn't ignore. Ginny looked between them, jaw clenched. Maybe it doesn't matter who locked it, she said. Maybe it matters what's inside. Creature called it shame. If it's dangerous, it might be dangerous, Molly said, cutting in. That's why we don't go poking around. This is a headquarters. We keep it safe by clearing obvious threats, not by breaking into sealed rooms like we're burglars. Hermione's laugh was short and bitter. Burglars? We've been rummaging through his childhood for days. Molly's voice dropped. With Remus supervising. With limits. Hermione gestured at the panel. And now we're at the only limit that actually matters. Remus finally spoke. Because if he didn't, the argument would swallow them. Hermione, Molly is right about one thing. This is an explicit boundary. Whoever set it, the ward is telling us something very clear. Stay out. Hermione's gaze snapped to him. And you're going to tell me we should obey it, even though Creature is panicking, even though there might be something here that could hurt people? Remus hesitated, because that was the fracture in the logic. He could argue ethics until his throat went raw, but war didn't care about ethics. Voldemort didn't pause because you'd chosen to respect a man's privacy. If the room contained something that could compromise the order, leaving it sealed because it felt morally clean, could become a kind of negligence. Molly read the hesitation in his face and stiffened. Remus, don't. Don't what? Hermione pressed. Don't admit that safety matters. Don't admit that secrecy can be used as a weapon. Molly's eyes went bright with anger that wasn't cruel, just terrified. This is not about weapons. This is about a man's dignity. Sirius has had every boundary torn apart his entire life. His family violated him. Then the Ministry violated him. Then Azkaban violated him. And now we are standing here, arguing about whether we get to violate him too, because we think we might find something useful. Hermione's voice softened just a fraction, but her eyes stayed hard. I'm not trying to violate him. I'm trying to make sure nothing hidden here kills someone. Molly took a step closer, and I'm trying to make sure we don't become people who break into a locked room because we feel entitled to the truth. Hermione held her ground. It's not entitlement if it's necessary. Necessary for what? Molly demanded. Give me one reason that isn't curiosity dressed up in noble language. Hermione's shoulders rose with a sharp breath. Because Sirius is in hiding, she said, voice rising. Because he might not survive this war. Because if something happens to him, and this room contains anything important, anything that should be preserved or protected or destroyed, it will be lost. And because Creature is panicking, he was ordered to hide this. If he's hiding it, then it matters. Molly's reply came like a blow. Privacy matters more. Hermione stared at her. Privacy matters more than people's safety? Privacy matters more than our right to know, Molly said fiercely. If there is something dangerous, Dumbledore should handle it. If there is something personal, Sirius should decide. But we do not break into a blood-locked room because it makes us feel like we're doing something meaningful. Ginny's hands curled into fists. If Dumbledore should handle it, then we tell him, she said. Right now, we tell him there's a sealed room we can't access, and Creature is acting strange. Molly hesitated. That is reasonable. Hermione's chin lifted, and then Dumbledore will ask what it is, and we'll say we don't know. And he'll say he can't make a plan around an unknown variable inside his headquarters. And then what? He'll force it open. Or he'll leave it. Either way, the choice still gets made. We're just handing responsibility to someone else, so we don't have to carry it. Remus felt his stomach twist, because Hermione wasn't wrong. He also didn't like the way the house seemed to listen more closely when they argued, as if conflict fed it. Molly's voice sharpened again. This isn't about carrying responsibility. It's about refusing to cross a line. Hermione's eyes flashed. Which line? The line Sirius drew? Or the line you drew because you can't stand the idea of knowing more? Molly's cheeks flushed. Hermione, no, Hermione pressed. And now the restraint in her snapped. You told me days ago that I was turning his trauma into an exhibit. You told me I was violating him. I listened. I agreed to boundaries. I stopped copying things. I stopped talking about them. I burned a copy of a private letter because I didn't trust myself to do the wrong thing. Ginny's eyes flicked to Hermione, startled. But Hermione didn't look at her. Her gaze stayed pinned to Molly, and something raw trembled under her words, like she had been carrying too much and had reached the end of her ability to be polite about it. I have tried to do this carefully, Hermione continued. I have tried to respect him while still acknowledging what was done to him. And now we find a literal locked door in his childhood bedroom that even his own blood is required to open. And you're telling me to pretend it isn't there? Molly's voice went low, dangerous in its calm. I'm telling you to respect what it means. Hermione's hands spread, helpless and furious. And I'm telling you it might mean he was forced to hide something. That shame isn't always chosen. Sometimes shame is imposed. Remus watched Ginny's face as she absorbed that. Ginny knew what imposed shame looked like. She'd carried it in her own way after the chamber. She didn't talk about it often, but Remus had seen the shadow it left in her eyes sometimes, the way she flinched at certain memories. Ginny spoke carefully. We need a decision, she said. We can't just stand here arguing. If we're leaving it, we leave it and we go. If we're opening it, we open it and we do it now, before we lose our nerve. Molly's gaze snapped to her. Ginny held her mother's eyes. Mum, if Creature is guarding something, and he panics and does something stupid, and someone gets hurt, I don't want you to tell me later that we did nothing because it felt polite. Molly's expression flickered, pain crossing it. You think I'm doing nothing? She said quietly. No, Ginny replied, voice steady. I think you're protecting. But sometimes protection can look like ignoring the thing that scares you. The words, landed. Molly's jaw tightened, and she looked away. Hermione's voice came out softer now, but no less determined. "We vote," she said. Molly's eyes narrowed. "This isn't a democracy." Hermione's mouth tightened. "It's not about democracy. It's about sharing responsibility. If we do something wrong, I don't want it to be one person's fault. I don't want it to be mine." Remus understood, suddenly, the deeper truth under Hermione's insistence on documentation and ethics and frameworks. Hermione was terrified of making the wrong choice and having to live with it alone. War had made all of them familiar with guilt. But Hermione had always carried guilt differently. She didn't shrug it off or turn it into anger. She catalogued it. She replayed it. She tried to find the exact moment where she could have done something better. A vote was her way of distributing the future regret. Remus exhaled slowly. "All right," he said. "We vote. But first, we say what we're really voting for. Not just open or don't open. The principle." Molly looked like she wanted to protest, but she didn't. She folded her arms and waited, rigid. Hermione went first, as if she'd been holding the words back and was relieved to let them out. "I vote to open," she said. "I'm voting for knowledge, for the principle that truth matters, that history matters, that hidden things in a war can become weapons. I'm voting for the idea that understanding can prevent harm. And yes," she swallowed, "I'm voting for the idea that if Sirius never comes back, what's behind this wall shouldn't be lost just because it was hidden." Remus nodded, not agreement, just acknowledgement. "Ginny?" Ginny took a breath, eyes still on the panel. "I vote not to open," she said, surprising Hermione. "I'm voting for his right to have something that is his, something no one touches, something no one reads, even if it's sad, even if it's important. I'm voting for dignity." Molly's shoulders loosened a fraction. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Molly." Molly's voice didn't shake, but there was strain under it. "I vote not to open. I'm voting for consent. For the idea that people deserve control over their own narrative, that we don't get to decide for them what parts of their life become public, even inside a secret headquarters. I'm voting for respect." That left Remus. His vote would decide. He stared at the panel. He thought of Sirius's laugh, too loud sometimes, like it was trying to drown out silence. He thought of Sirius's impatience, his need for movement, his hatred of being trapped. He thought of how Sirius's eyes had looked in the shrieking shack when he'd spoken of his family. Not soft, not sad, but hard with a hatred that had been forged young and never cooled. Remus thought of his own life. The way privacy had always been a fragile thing. The way a single accidental discovery could change everything. The way people looked at him differently once they knew what he was, even when they tried not to, even when they meant well. He thought of the times well-intentioned people had tried to help him accept being a werewolf, as if acceptance was something they could give him, as if his pain existed for their comfort. And then he thought of the war. He thought of order meetings in this house, people gathering in rooms filled with unseen corners. He thought of Creature, panicked and bound by old commands. He thought of the word shame. What had Walburga Black called shame? Anything that contradicted her worldview. Anything that suggested softness, love, weakness, impurity. But shame could also mean something else. A secret that could destroy the Black family's reputation. A secret that could compromise the order. A secret that could get people killed. Remus closed his eyes, and when he opened them, he already knew what he was going to do. "I vote to open," he said quietly. Hermione exhaled sharply, relief flashing through her for half a second before it turned into something heavier. Molly's face tightened, her lips pressed together as if she was physically holding back what she wanted to say. Ginny's eyes widened. "Remus, Remus lifted a hand. I vote to open with conditions. We seal it again immediately after. We document nothing. We take nothing. We tell no one what we find. Not Dumbledore. Not Harry. Not Sirius, unless he asks directly. What we learn stays between the four of us. Hermione stared. No documentation, not even notes. No, Remus said, voice firm. If we're crossing this line, we do it once. We look. We understand what kind of risk it is. Then we put it back. And if what's inside is purely personal, we treat it like sacred information, like someone's medical condition. We know it, but we do not act on it. We do not let it change how we see him. Molly's voice was tight. You can't unknow something. No, Remus agreed. But you can choose to wall it off. You can choose not to make it a lens through which you judge someone. Hermione nodded slowly, as if she hated the restriction, but understood its logic. Ginny swallowed, then said quietly, All right. Molly's eyes closed for a moment. When she opened them again, there was resignation in her expression. If we're doing this, she said, we do it now. Before I regained my common sense, Remus turned back towards the panel. The ward behind it hummed, stubborn and old. This requires black blood, he said. Hermione's gaze flicked to the bookshelf, then to her beaded bag, and something dangerous sparked. We don't have black blood, she said, but we have black objects. Molly's eyes narrowed. Hermione's hand was already inside her bag, fingers searching through confiscated items they'd removed from other rooms. Objects they'd planned to lock away, catalogued and contained, because old pureblood houses collected dangerous things the way others collected silver. Hermione pulled out a ring. It was heavy, dark metal engraved with a crest that looked like serpents biting their own tails. It radiated a low, unpleasant thrum of old magic. This belonged to Phineas Black, Hermione said. It has bloodline magic in it. If I use it as a focus, you're suggesting we use a cursed family artifact to break into a blood-locked room, Molly said flatly. Hermione met her gaze. We're already breaking in. The method doesn't make it morally worse. Remus took the ring carefully. He could feel how old it was, how saturated with family identity. It wasn't actively cursed in the way some things were, but it was not clean magic. It was the kind that carried assumptions. Blood matters, lineage matters, ownership matters. Remus held it up to the panel. If this goes wrong, he said, we stop immediately. Agreed, Hermione and Ginny said at once. Molly's agreement came a second later, like it cost her. Agreed. Hermione guided Remus's hand to the exact point where the ward felt thickest. Now, she said softly, push magic through the ring, not to break it, but to convince it you belong. Remus hated the feeling of that sentence. Convince it you belong. But he did it. He pressed the ring to the wood and sent a controlled pulse of magic through it. Steady, careful. The ward resisted at first, pushing back with a cold, stubborn pressure that felt like a family refusing to admit strangers. Hermione whispered a series of very old unlocking phrases, not the casual Alohomora they'd learned at 11, but something older, shaped by lineage magic. The ward shuddered. For a breathless moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the magic began to unravel. Not snapping like a broken rope, but loosening like a knot being undone. The panel shimmered, turned translucent, then vanished entirely, as if it had never been there. Behind it was a door, small, child height, painted a faded blue that looked almost cheerful against the house's oppressive darkness. The blue was so out of place that it made Remus's chest ache. Someone had carved words into the wood with a small blade, letters uneven and determined. Private. Keep out. This means you. Ginny's breath hitched. Hermione reached for the handle, but Remus caught her wrist gently. One more thing, he said. We promised. If we regret what we find, we stop. We reseal. We do not push through just because we've come this far. Hermione swallowed. Agreed. Ginny nodded. Agreed. Molly's voice came out quiet and grim. Agreed. Hermione turned the handle. The door opened. For half a second, Remus expected something foul to rush out. Stale air, cursed smoke, the smell of dark magic. He expected danger because Grimmauld Place taught you to expect danger. Instead, the air that drifted out was different. Still old, still dusty, but underneath it was something else. Paint, faded wax, the faint scent of paper that had been kept dry and untouched for years. Remus had to duck to enter. The ceiling was low, designed for a child, comfortable for someone small, cramped for adults. The room itself was barely larger than the punishment cupboard they'd found days ago. But it wasn't cruel. It was filled. The walls had been painted over the dark wood paneling, stars and constellations scattered across them, done by a child's hand, uneven but careful. Not the black family constellations, not the star charts of pure-blood tradition. These were Muggle constellations. Orion the Hunter, Ursa Major, Cassiopeia. They were labeled in neat script. Hermione lifted her wand light, and the stars seemed to shift slightly as the light moved, making the room feel almost alive. A small mattress lay on the floor, covered with a faded blanket. A wooden crate served as a table. On it sat the stub of a candle and a stack of books. Remus's eyes caught on the titles and his throat tightened. Treasure Island, a book about explorers, an adventure story with a battered spine and dog-eared pages. Contraband, Hermione whispered, voice soft with shock. He brought them here. Ginny stepped inside slowly, as if afraid that moving too fast might crack something fragile. It's a bedroom, she said. But not quite. It's like a hideout. A sanctuary, Molly said, and her voice broke slightly on the word as if she hated that a child had needed one. Remus moved closer to the floor, where something lay weighted down with a smooth river stone. An envelope, addressed in a child's handwriting, uneven but determined. To future Sirius, age 17. All four of them froze. Hermione knelt beside it, but didn't touch it immediately, as if even she understood instinctively that this was the edge of something too intimate. He wrote to himself. Ginny whispered. Remus recognized the handwriting with a strange jolt. He'd seen it in early letters from James, the ones Sirius had kept. The way the S curved, the way the I dots were sharp. This was him, Remus said quietly. Before Hogwarts, Molly's voice was firm, sudden. We do not read it. Hermione's hand hovered. Mrs. Weasley. No, Molly said, eyes hard now. This is the most private thing we found. A child's letter to his future self. Absolutely not. Hermione looked up at Remus, and he saw the question in her eyes. Permission, responsibility, the burden of the choice shifting toward him again. Remus should have said no. He should have ended it right there, closed the door, resealed the wall, and carried away only the knowledge that the room existed. But the envelope sat there like a heartbeat. Like the house had been built to crush a child's voice, and this was the place he'd hidden it so it wouldn't be crushed. Remus thought of Creature's panic. Secret room sealed. Never let anyone enter. Never let the shame be exposed. Wahlburger Black had called this shame. A child painting stars. A child writing hope to himself. A child building a tiny refuge and sealing it with blood magic. Remus swallowed and nodded once. Hermione's breath shuddered out of her. Molly made a small sound of protest, but she didn't stop Hermione. Maybe because she'd already lost the vote. Maybe because she couldn't bring herself to put hands on Hermione and force her away. Maybe because part of her, deep down, wanted to know too, even if she hated that she wanted it. Hermione picked up the envelope. The wax seal was crude, made with a candle stub, pressed down with something small. It crumbled easily, aged and brittle. Hermione opened it, unfolded the parchment, and they crowded close, 4 people in a secret room, painted with stars, reading words that were never meant for them. Dear future Sirius, age 17. I'm writing this the night before I leave for Hogwarts. I'm 11. I know I'll probably never read this because I'll forget I hid it here, or because I'll be too embarrassed by how young I sound. But I wanted to write it anyway, just in case. I'm scared. Everyone says Hogwarts will be brilliant. Andromeda said so in her letter, the one I'm not supposed to have. James Potter says it's the best place in the world. We met at the robe shop. He says houses don't matter except for Quidditch, and that no one cares if you're from a dark family, as long as you're not horrible. But what if I am horrible? What if I'm more like them than I want to be? What if the Sorting Hat puts me in Slytherin and I become just like mother and father? What if I can't escape what I am? Ginny's hand flew to her mouth. Hermione's eyes blurred with tears, but she kept reading, voice trembling slightly. I've been thinking about blood and whether it determines who you are. Mother says our blood is sacred, and it makes us better. But if it makes us better, why does being better feel so much like being trapped? I'm hiding this letter in my secret room, the only place in the house that's truly mine. I made it when I was 7, used magic I wasn't supposed to know. Stole paint. Worked on it for weeks, whenever they locked me in my bedroom for punishment. It's not much, but it's mine. The stars are from a muggle book I found. Regulus would tell if he knew. But he won't find this place. No one will. I sealed it with blood magic, so only I can open it. So, future Sirius, you're 17 now. You've graduated Hogwarts. You know which house you ended up in. I hope it wasn't Slytherin. I hope you found friends who didn't care about blood purity. I hope James Potter became your friend like he promised. I hope you're not like them. I hope you proved blood doesn't determine everything, that you can choose. But if you did end up like them, if you're reading this and you're a Death Eater or a blood purist or someone who hurts people because of blood, I want you to know something. 11-year-old you hated that. Hated everything they stand for. Hated the cruelty and pride and obsession with purity. You wanted to be good. You wanted to be kind. You wanted to choose love instead of power. So if you forgot, if you let them shape you into something dark, it's not too late. You can still choose differently. And if you did escape, if you became someone good, thank you. Thank you for being brave enough to leave. Thank you for proving we're more than blood. Don't come back here. Don't let them pull you back. Whatever life you made for yourself, protect it. It's worth more than anything in this house. Burn this letter after you read it. Don't let anyone else see it. This is private, just between 11-year-old us and 17-year-old us. Good luck. Be brave. Be kind. Be anything but what they tried to make you. Sirius, age 11. P.S. I'd painted the stars so I could practice escaping. Every night before sleep, I look at them and imagine flying away. So, if you're reading this, I guess we made it. We escaped. Hermione lowered the letter slowly. Her hands were shaking. Tears slid down her cheeks without sound, and she didn't wipe them away as if she didn't deserve the comfort of wiping them away. As if crying was the price of looking. No one spoke. Remus stared at the childish handwriting and felt something in him split open. Not pity, exactly. Something sharper. Something like grief for the child Sirius had been, and admiration for the child's stubborn hope, and rage for the adults who had made hope something he had to hide in a room behind a wall. Ginny whispered, barely audible. He never read it. Hermione blinked, confused, then understood. She stared at the seal fragments. The wax was intact. It crumbled because it was old, not because it had been opened before. The room had been sealed. The letter had been waiting. Sirius had built this place at 7, wrote this at 11, and then, sometime later, he left and never came back to read it. Why? Hermione whispered. Why would he lock it away forever? Molly's voice came out quiet, heavy. Because he was ashamed, she said. Hermione's head snapped up. Ashamed of this? Molly looked at the painted stars, at the small mattress, at the books, at the trembling letter in Hermione's hands. Trauma makes you ashamed of your own survival, Molly said softly. Ashamed of needing comfort. Ashamed of being afraid. Ashamed of being the kind of child who writes a letter to himself, begging him not to become evil. She swallowed. He probably thought this room represented everything he wanted to stop being. The scared boy, the trapped boy. So he sealed it, so no one could ever see it. Ginny's voice shook with anger and heartbreak. That's not something to be ashamed of. No, Molly agreed. But that doesn't mean he knew that. Remus knelt by the mattress, touching the faded blanket with 2 fingers, like it might burn. How many nights, he thought. How many times had a child hidden here to breathe? He imagined Sirius curled on the mattress, staring at the stars, imagining flight, because imagination was the only thing they couldn't lock in a cupboard. Remus's throat tightened. We have to reseal this, he said, immediately. Hermione looked at him as if she didn't want to let go of the letter, like holding it was the only way to keep the child's voice from disappearing again. But, no, Remus said, firmer. We put it back exactly as we found it. We seal the room. We do not take this with us. We do not write notes. We do not discuss it. We do not tell anyone. Ginny swallowed hard. Not even Harry. Especially not Harry, Molly said, voice fierce in its gentleness. Harry doesn't need the weight of knowing his godfather's most private thoughts were read by other people. He doesn't need to carry that guilt, too. Hermione's voice came out broken. Shouldn't Sirius know? Shouldn't someone tell him what he wrote, what he wanted? Remus looked at her, eyes tired. So he can know that even this wasn't safe. So he can feel violated twice? Once by us reading it, and again by us telling him we did. Hermione flinched. Molly's voice softened. The kindest thing we can do now is to pretend this never happened. Not because it didn't matter, but because it mattered too much. Hermione stared at the letter a long time. Then, with agonizing care, she refolded it, slid it back into the envelope, placed the envelope on the floor exactly where it had been, and set the smooth riverstone back on top, weighting it down like an anchor. They backed out one by one. Remus stayed last. He looked at the painted stars, the cramped sanctuary, the childish defiance carved into every brushstroke. He thought of Sirius at 11, writing the word kind, like it was a spell that could protect him. I'm sorry, Remus whispered to the empty room. We shouldn't have looked. Then he closed the faded blue door. Hermione held out the ring, hands trembling. Remus pressed it against the ward point again, whispered the sealing phrase Hermione had used, and felt the magic knit itself back into place, stronger now, as if the house was eager to swallow its secrets again. The blue door vanished behind reappearing panel. Within moments, the wall looked ordinary, too ordinary. They stood in Sirius's childhood bedroom in complete silence. 4 people carrying knowledge they were never meant to carry. We made a mistake, Molly said finally. Yes, Remus said. Hermione's voice was thin. But we can choose what to do with it. Ginny's eyes were red. Can you really unknow something like that? No, Remus said. But we can wall it off. We can refuse to let it change how we see him. We can treat it like something sacred that stays behind that wall. Molly nodded, and there was pain in it, because the alternative is treating him differently because we know he was once a scared child. That would be another violation. Hermione swallowed hard, wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, like she was embarrassed to have cried. Then we don't speak of it again, she said, voice firm with the desperation of someone making a vow because it's the only way to survive what she's done. Remus looked at each of them. Promise. I promise, Ginny said. Molly's promise came out like a prayer. I promise. Hermione hesitated half a second, then nodded once. I promise. The house creaked around them, a slow settling sound like satisfaction. They finished their work that day with mechanical precision. Boxes packed, sheets changed, floors scrubbed, curtains aired. A headquarters made functional. By evening, Grimmauld Place looked almost livable, but the air inside it felt heavier, not lighter, as if the house had gained something from them. Their knowledge, their guilt, their silence. Before they left, Remus paused in the entrance hall beneath the covered portrait of Walburga Black. The house felt quieter now, not kinder. Quieter like it was holding its breath. We saw you, he said under his breath, to the walls, to the secrets sealed behind them, to the childhood sanctuary they'd invaded and then tried to restore. We saw what they did. We saw what he survived. He didn't say Sirius's name out loud. The house didn't deserve to hear it. We'll never tell, Remus added softly. It was a promise and a penance. Outside, night had fallen. The square was dark, street lamps flickering uncertainly. The others waited on the steps, faces pale and tired. Remus locked the door to number 12. The house disappeared behind its wards, hiding itself again the way it always had. Some secrets, Remus thought as he followed Molly, Ginny, and Hermione into the night, were meant to stay hidden, even when finding them broke your heart. Especially then, Grimmauld Place became a headquarters the way a wound became a scar. Not cleanly, not neatly, but inevitably. Within a week, the front door no longer opened, only to Molly's brisk footsteps and Hermione's careful wand-light. It opened to the Order of the Phoenix in fragments, members arriving in twos and threes, cloaks damp from London drizzle, faces tight with urgency, voices lowered as they crossed the threshold, like people entering a chapel or a prison. The house accepted them, not warmly, not willingly, but it accepted them the way it accepted everything, with a grudging tolerance that felt like menace. Molly made the kitchen functional first. She did it out of instinct. If you could feed people, you could steady them. Food was an anchor. A pot of soup simmering could make even war feel briefly survivable. The kitchen stayed the warmest room in the house, not because it wanted to be warm, but because Molly refused to let cold win there. She hung fresh towels. She scrubbed counters. She lit lamps that didn't flicker. She set out mugs like an act of defiance. Hermione kept her distance from certain corridors now, though only she would have admitted how deliberate it was. When she passed Sirius's childhood bedroom, she didn't look at the wall beside the bookshelf. She kept her gaze forward, with the stubborn discipline of someone who had decided to live with a secret, by never acknowledging where it lived. Ginny drifted through the house like a flame in a glass lantern, contained, bright, and too easily shaken. She worked harder than anyone else, throwing herself into tasks with a fury that had nowhere else to go. When she heard Walburga Black's portrait shriek, Ginny's jaw clenched so hard her cheek muscles jumped. But she never said what she was thinking. Remus watched them. He watched Molly's hands when she ladled soup, the way they trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking. He watched Hermione's face when Order members joked about Sirius being dramatic, the way her expression tightened as if the word dramatic had suddenly become a knife. He watched Ginny when someone mentioned Azkaban, the way she stared at a wall too long, like she was imagining a cupboard, a small mattress, painted stars. They had promised. They had sealed it. They had agreed. Never speak of it again. And still, the secret spread through them like ink in water, not visible in any single drop, but changing the whole. The first strain came from something small, as most dangerous things did. It was Mundungus Fletcher, arriving late one evening with his usual air of shameless cheer, a faint smell of stale smoke, and something suspiciously bulky under his coat. All right, don't all look at me like that, he said, pushing past the hall into the kitchen. I've brought supplies. Useful things. Things the Order needs. Molly turned from the stove slowly, eyes narrowing. Mundungus, she said, and the way she said his name made it sound like a curse. What did you bring, and where did you get it? Mundungus smiled too widely, which answered the second question immediately. Now, Molly, love, don't start. Before he could finish, Wahlburger Black's portrait shrieked from behind its curtains upstairs, a sudden burst of venom that shook dust from the ceiling. Thieves! Filth! Contaminants in the noble house. I smell rot and poverty and muggle stench. Mundungus flinched, then scowled. Bloody hell, that thing still going. Molly's eyes flashed. Mind your language in my kitchen. It's not your kitchen, Wahlburger screeched, voice amplified and sharp as shattered glass. Blood traitors, parasites. Cattle breeding in my hallways. Remus, who had been sitting at the table sorting papers, stood quickly. He didn't move toward the portrait. He didn't have to. The house reacted to tone, and Remus's voice, calm and controlled, was one of the few things Grimmauld Place seemed to begrudgingly respect. Enough, he said quietly. The portrait continued shrieking, but Remus's wand flicked and the curtains snapped closed around it with extra layers of muffling charm. The sound became distant, still present, but contained. Mundungus shook his head. You lot are mad meeting in a place like this. Molly's hands tightened around the ladle. It's what we have. Mundungus set his bundle on the table and began unpacking. Healing salves, bandages, a few potions of questionable origin. And Molly's expression went from tight to dangerous. A silver goblet, engraved with a crest. Molly stared at it. Remus felt a cold slide down his spine. It wasn't just that it looked expensive. It looked like it belonged here. That's black silver, Molly said softly. Mundungus blinked. Black silver? It's just a goblet. It's a goblet from this house, Molly said, and now her voice was sharp. Where did you get it? Mundungus shrugged, trying for casual. Found it. Sitting around, not doing anyone any good collecting dust. You stole it, Molly snapped. You stole from this house, Mundungus's grin faltered. I didn't steal. I borrowed. Molly's wand was out. Her cheeks flushed. You thieving little... Remus stepped between them quickly, hand raised. Molly, breathe. Molly's eyes were bright with fury, and something else. Fear, Remus realized. Not fear of Mundungus, not even fear of theft. Fear of what it meant, because this house wasn't just a building. It was a vault, a place saturated with old magic, old secrets, and they had already learned, painfully, that some things hidden in these walls were not just objects. Some things were history, identity, sanctuary. Mundungus stealing from the house wasn't merely annoying. It was another violation, and violations piled up here like dust. Molly's voice shook. Get out, Mundungus scoffed. Oh, come on. Get out, Molly repeated, and the ladle in her hand looked suddenly like a weapon. Take your stolen rubbish with you. Mundungus grabbed his bundle, muttering, and shuffled toward the door, and as he left, Wahlburger's portrait shrieked again, as if delighted. Yes, yes, drive out the filth. Drive out the thieves. This house rejects you. It rejects. Remus snapped the curtains tighter, jaw clenched, then turned back to Molly. Molly was staring at the table as if she could still see the goblet's imprint there. Her breathing was fast. Hermione entered the kitchen in the aftermath, drawn by raised voices. Ginny followed close behind, eyes sharp. What happened? Hermione asked. Mundungus happened, Ginny said tersely, and glanced at Molly. He tried to steal. Hermione's face hardened. From the house. Molly nodded once. From Sirius. And there it was. The word that made Hermione's gaze flick upward, automatically, toward the ceiling, as if she could see through wood and plaster to a wall beside a bookshelf. Remus watched her eyes do it. Molly saw it too. Ginny saw it too. None of them said anything. But the air shifted. The secret moved like a shadow between them. Later that night, after the kitchen was quiet, Molly found Remus in the library. He was sorting order reports, trying to keep his mind on the immediate. Spies, safe houses, meetings, the things that could be acted on. The things that didn't require staring at painted stars and remembering the feel of guilt on your tongue. Molly closed the door behind her. Remus looked up. Molly, her face was drawn. She looked older than she had a week ago. We can't do this, she said without preamble. Remus's stomach tightened. Do what? Keep pretending the house is just a headquarters, Molly said, voice low. Keep letting people tramp through it, joke in it, steal in it, like it's just another building. It's not. It's a mausoleum, Remus supplied. Molly's mouth twisted. Worse. Because it's alive. Remus didn't argue. He'd felt it too. The way the house seemed to listen, the way it reacted to conflict, the way its portraits spat their venom like the walls enjoyed watching people flinch. Molly sat down heavily in the nearest chair. I keep thinking about that room, she said quietly. Remus's chest tightened. Molly, I know, she cut in. We promised. We don't talk about it. But I keep thinking about it anyway. About that child. About him writing to himself. About how her voice caught. About how he told himself to be kind. As if kindness was a thing he had to remind himself to choose. Remus said nothing. There was no safe response. Molly pressed her fingers to her eyes. I made him sandwiches once, years ago, when he came to the burrow with James before the war. He ate like he'd never been allowed to eat without being watched. And I thought, what a strange boy. So loud, so sharp, always pushing. I didn't understand. Her voice went quieter. Now I understand too much. Remus felt the familiar twist of guilt. That was the thing about understanding. Once you had it, you couldn't return to ignorance, even if ignorance had been kinder. Molly exhaled hard. How do I look him in the eye now, Remus? How do I speak to him like normal, knowing what I know? You do it anyway, Remus said quietly, because he deserves normal. He deserves to be treated like the man he is, not the child he was. Molly's laugh was brittle. Easy for you to say. Remus flinched. Was it? He wasn't sure. He'd known Sirius as a child and as a man. He'd watched him become someone who used humor like a blade and loyalty like a shield. Remus had already carried 1,000 private understandings about Sirius. This secret was just a new one, heavier and sharper. It's not easy, Remus admitted. Molly's eyes fixed on him. Then why did you vote to open it? The question landed like a stone. Remus's throat tightened. Because Creature was panicking. Because the war doesn't allow unknowns inside headquarters. Because I thought it might be dangerous. Molly's voice was quiet, relentless. And was it? Remus pictured the room. painted stars, adventure books, a mattress, a letter begging himself not to become evil. Dangerous, Molly repeated softly. Is a child's hope dangerous? Remus swallowed. No. Molly's eyes shone. Then what we did it for nothing. No, Remus said quickly, and even as he said it, he knew how thin it sounded. Not for nothing. We violated him, Molly whispered. We learned we're capable of becoming exactly what his family was. People who decide what is allowed to keep private. Remus closed his eyes briefly. That wasn't fair, and yet it wasn't entirely wrong either. We resealed it, Remus said, voice low. We restored his boundary. After breaking it, Molly said. Remus didn't answer. Molly stood abruptly, pacing once, then stopping like she'd hit an invisible wall. And now, she continued, this house is full of people. People who don't know. People who might wander. People like Mundungus who might steal. What if someone else finds it? What if someone else breaks in? What if, her voice dropped, what if Creature decides to show it to someone? Out of spite, out of loyalty to Wahlburger's commands, out of panic, Remus's heart thudded. That, finally, was something he could act on. We need to reinforce the wards around that area, he said immediately. Not to lock Sirius out. He can open it with blood, but to hide the panel more completely. Muggle-repelling charms, disillusionment, confusion wards. Make it harder for anyone to even notice the inconsistencies. Molly stared at him. You're going to ward it. Protect the secret room. Remus's mouth was dry. Yes. Molly's shoulders sagged, as if the reality of what they were doing settled like weight. We're guarding it now, she whispered, like Creature was. Remus flinched. It felt true. They weren't only witnesses anymore. They were custodians of a boundary they had crossed. They were protecting a secret they had no right to know, while trying to ensure no one else crossed it the way they had. And the irony tasted bitter. The next day, Remus and Hermione went upstairs together. They didn't speak much as they climbed. Ginny didn't come. Molly didn't come. Neither of them wanted to stand in that bedroom again and look at the wall, even if they pretended not to look. Hermione moved with clipped precision, as if she could turn the whole task into logic to keep emotion at bay. We can layer concealment charms without touching the blood ward, she murmured, wand already in her hand. Make the panel appear a solid wall to anyone without intent, a kind of perceptual ward. Remus nodded. Do it. Hermione hesitated. This feels wrong. Remus's voice was careful. It's wrong that we know. It's not wrong to make sure no one else finds it. Hermione's jaw tightened. We're still making choices about his privacy. Yes, Remus admitted. But this choice protects the boundary instead of breaking it. Hermione stared at the wall for a long moment, then nodded, almost imperceptibly. All right. She cast the first charm, a subtle weaving that made the wood grain smooth itself, matching perfectly. Then another, a light confusion spell that caused the eye to slide away from the panel, as if it was uninteresting. Remus added a final ward, quiet and firm, keyed to order members, not to prevent access, but to alert him if someone lingered too long in that exact spot, if someone ran their hands along the wall the way they had. When they were done, Hermione lowered her wand slowly. No, one will find it accidentally now, she said. Remus's voice was quiet. Good. Hermione swallowed. I keep hearing his voice. Remus looked at her sharply. Whose? Hermione's face went pale. The letter. The way he wrote. Be brave. Be kind. Be anything but what they tried to make you. Remus felt the same sting. The letter had lodged inside him like a splinter. He hadn't spoken of it, but it rose in his mind at strange moments. When he saw Sirius's name on an order report, when he heard Harry speak of his godfather with fierce devotion, when he passed a cupboard door and felt his chest tighten. Hermione's eyes flicked away, embarrassed by her own confession. Forget I said that. Remus didn't. He couldn't. The weeks went on. The order met regularly in the kitchen and the drawing room. Plans were made, missions assigned, worries shared in quick, controlled bursts. The house filled with the sound of murmured strategy and suppressed fear. And through it all, Creature moved like a ghost. He became quieter, less explosive. The insults still slipped out sometimes, muttered under his breath, but the shrieking panic receded into something colder, watchful, tight. Remus started noticing Creature's gaze lingering on Hermione in particular, then on Ginny, then on Molly, as if Creature knew they had seen something and hated them for it, or feared them for it. One evening, Remus caught Creature standing in the corridor outside Sirius's childhood bedroom, staring at the wall beside the bookshelf. Creature didn't notice Remus at first. His ears twitched, his watery eyes gleamed. He muttered to himself in a hoarse whisper, "Mistress said sealed. Mistress said shame. Mistress said, never let anyone see. Bad Creature. Bad for letting them close. Too close." Remus's stomach tightened. Creature. The house elf jerked, eyes snapping up. His expression twisted instantly into hatred, as if hatred was a mask he could slam on quickly to hide fear. Half-breed, he spat. Lurking, listening, spying in the noble house. Remus kept his voice calm. "What are you doing here?" Creature's hands clenched. "Guarding? Guarding what?" Remus asked gently. Creature's lips peeled back, and for a heartbeat, Remus saw something raw under the contempt. "Guarding what must stay hidden," Creature hissed. "Guarding Master Sirius's shame. Guarding Mistress's commands. Bad half-breed will not take it. Bad mudblood will not steal it. Bad blood traitors will not touch." Remus took a slow breath. "Creature, Master Sirius owns this house now. His commands override Wahlburgers." Creature's body trembled. His voice cracked. Master Sirius left. Master Sirius abandoned. Mistress is dead, but Mistress's words still burn. Creature must obey. Creature must. Remus's voice softened. "You don't have to hurt yourself." Creature's eyes went wide, and his hands flew to his ears as if Remus had threatened him. Then he vanished with a crack, leaving the corridor cold and empty. Remus stood there a long moment, staring at the wall. So Creature knew. Of course he did. It was his job to know. The question was, what would Creature do with that knowledge, now that he was torn between masters, between commands, between hatred and grief? Remus returned downstairs with a heaviness in his chest that no cup of tea could lift. And slowly, in small moments, the secret began to strain them. Molly snapped more often than usual, then apologized quickly, as if she didn't have the energy to argue and couldn't bear more guilt. Hermione became more rigid, as if control of her own behavior was the only thing keeping her from spiraling. Ginny stopped laughing as easily. When she did laugh, it sounded a fraction forced, like she was trying to prove she could still be normal. And Remus found himself flinching whenever someone mentioned Sirius casually, whenever someone joked about him being childish, whenever someone criticized him for being reckless. Because now Remus couldn't help picturing an 11-year-old boy writing in shaky script, "I'm scared." He began to notice the way people spoke about Sirius, as if he was only two things: dangerous or brilliant, reckless or loyal, dramatic or heroic. They didn't speak about him as if he was human. And Remus had seen, in painted stars and small words on parchment, the part of him that had always been human and had been punished for it. One night, Hermione cornered Remus in the library again. Her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. "I did something," she whispered. Remus's chest tightened. What? Hermione swallowed. I wrote it down. Remus went still. You promised. I know, Hermione said, voice shaking. I didn't keep it. I didn't keep it, but I wrote it down, and then I burned it. She pressed her fingers to her forehead. I needed to know I could, that I could preserve it if I had to, that I could choose to destroy it. I don't know why I did that. It felt like I needed proof that my hands were still under my control. Remus stared at her. The confession terrified him more than the act itself, because it meant the secret was not sealed neatly behind a wall. It was alive inside them. It was pushing against their promises, their ethics, their fear. Remus's voice was quiet. Hermione, if you feel like you're losing control— I'm not, Hermione said sharply, then softened. Not completely, but it's in my head all the time. And I keep thinking, what if Sirius never knows that younger him wrote that? What if he dies and no one ever tells him he wanted to be kind? Remus felt the familiar conflict flare, truth versus consent, comfort versus violation. Hermione's eyes shone. We could tell him without telling him how we know. We could say— She hesitated. We could say, I think you were always brave. I think you always wanted to choose differently. Remus's voice hardened. That would still be acting on knowledge he didn't give us. Hermione flinched. So we do nothing. We do what we promised, Remus said. We keep it sealed. We keep it private. We carry it quietly. Hermione's laugh was soft and bitter. Quietly, like a disease. Remus's chest tightened. No, he said firmly. Like a responsibility. Hermione stared at him a long moment. Then she nodded once, stiffly. All right, she whispered. Responsibility. She left the library without another word. Remus sat alone at the table, staring at the stack of reports he could no longer focus on. The house was quiet upstairs, but Remus could almost feel the hidden room through the floors, like a heartbeat in the walls, a child's sanctuary sealed behind old magic, a letter never read by the person it was meant for, and four adults trying to live with the knowledge that they had entered it anyway. Outside, London continued. The war continued. The order continued. And Grimmauld Place held its breath, waiting, as if it knew, because houses like this always knew, that secrets didn't stay quiet forever. Sirius returned to Grimmauld Place on a night when the rain fell like it was trying to wash London clean, and failing. Remus was in the kitchen with Molly, going over a list of contacts and safe houses, both of them pretending the work was ordinary. Ginny was upstairs somewhere, and Hermione was in the library with a stack of books she hadn't been reading for at least an hour, her eyes moving over pages without absorbing them. Creature had been quiet all day. Too quiet. That had become, over the weeks, its own warning sign. The door at number 12 didn't slam or creak when it opened. It slipped inward with the soft hush of old wards recognizing someone they were bound to obey. Remus felt it before he heard it, a shift in the house's atmosphere like a lung drawing breath. Then a voice came from the entrance hall, low and dry with exhaustion. If anyone asks, I was never here. Molly froze, ladle in hand, as if the sound of that voice had turned her to stone. Remus's heart thudded once. Hard. He stood so quickly his chair scraped the floor. Sirius. Molly whispered the name like it was a plea and a reprimand at the same time. Remus was already moving. In the entrance hall, Sirius Black stood dripping rain onto the rug, hair darker than usual, and plastered to his forehead. His clothes were patched and worn, his face gaunt, but his eyes were alive in the way Remus had learned to fear and love at once. Bright, restless, defensive. He looked at Remus first, mouth twisting into something that tried to be a grin and failed. Hello, Moony. Then his eyes flicked to Molly, and the expression shifted again, a flash of awkwardness, then irritation, then something softer buried beneath it. "Mrs. Weasley," he said, as if that single title could keep distance in place. Molly stepped forward, like she couldn't help herself. For a second, it looked like she might hug him. Then she remembered who he was, or who he wanted to be, and stopped short. "You can't just come here," she said, voice shaking with anger and fear. "You can't just stroll in like I own the place?" Sirius supplied, voice sharp. Molly flinched. Remus watched that flinch and felt the old guilt rise. Sirius always did that. He turned vulnerability into a blade because blades were safer than being seen. "The wards let you in," Remus said carefully. Sirius's gaze slid sideways, as if he'd forgotten the house could obey him even when he didn't want it to. "Yeah, well," he said, shrugging. "I was nearby, needed information. Thought it might be useful to remind everyone I'm still alive." Molly's jaw tightened. "Useful to who? The Order or you?" Sirius's mouth twitched. "Both." Remus stepped closer, lowering his voice. "What happened?" Sirius's eyes flickered. Close call. Too many eyes. I had to move. He shook rain from his sleeves like a dog. "I'm fine." He wasn't fine, Remus thought. He never was. But it wasn't the kind of not fine you could point at and fix with a bandage. Molly gestured sharply toward the kitchen. "Inside. Now, before you catch your death and make me regret not hexing you myself." Sirius lifted an eyebrow. Still bossy then. Molly didn't reply. She turned and marched back into the kitchen like she could drag him into safety by force of will. Remus followed, and as he crossed the threshold into the kitchen, he felt the house shift again, as if it had been waiting for Sirius to step inside so it could tighten around him. Sirius paused in the doorway, gaze sweeping the room. Clean counters, fresh towels, a pot simmering, lamps lit. For a moment something in his expression flickered. Surprise, maybe, or the faint discomfort of seeing his childhood house altered into something almost domestic. Then his eyes hardened, and he forced the smirk back into place. "You've redecorated," he said. Molly made a tight sound. "I've made it usable. There's a difference." Sirius took a seat with exaggerated care, like sitting at a kitchen table in his own house was somehow an insult to his dignity. He leaned back, stretching his legs, posture loose, but eyes too sharp, always scanning. Remus sat across from him. Molly shoved a mug of tea towards Sirius, like she was feeding a stubborn animal. "Drink." Sirius stared at it as if tea might be a trap. Then, because defiance was his default, he lifted it and drank. His hands trembled slightly. Remus noticed. Molly noticed too. Her mouth tightened, but she said nothing. The kitchen door opened, and Ginny came in. She stopped dead when she saw Sirius. For half a second, her face did something complicated. Relief, anger, disbelief, and a young, fierce tenderness she tried to hide. "You're here," she said. Sirius looked at her, and something in his expression softened in a way Remus rarely saw. "Hello, Ginny." Ginny crossed her arms hard. "You're an idiot." Sirius's grin flashed real this time. "That's what I've been told." Ginny stepped closer, gaze scanning him like she was checking for injuries. Then she seemed to remember herself and stopped, arms still crossed. "Where's Harry?" she demanded. "Not here," Molly said quickly. Sirius's eyes sharpened. "Why?" "Because," Molly said, voice firm. "We're not letting you and him run off and do something reckless. Because you've decided rules don't apply to you." Sirius leaned back, smile thin. "So the mother hen still pecks." Molly's cheeks flushed. "Don't start." Sirius tilted his head. "I'm not starting. I'm just observing. This house is full of Weasleys now. It's almost cheerful." Ginny's jaw clenched. It's not cheerful. It's functional. Sirius's gaze flicked over her, and for a heartbeat, Remus saw something like respect. That's new. The kitchen door opened again. Hermione entered. She stopped as if she'd hit a wall. For a second, her face went blank. Then too bright, then carefully controlled. She had learned, over the weeks, how to make herself look ordinary, even when her mind was screaming. Sirius looked up. "Granger," he said, voice casual. Hermione's throat worked. "Sirius." Sirius's eyebrows lifted slightly at the use of his first name, but he didn't comment. He studied her for a moment, and Remus felt his stomach tighten, because Sirius had always been good at reading people. He had survived by reading people. He noticed things. Hermione stepped farther into the room. She kept her hands very still, as if any tremor might reveal too much. "How are you?" she asked, and the question sounded absurdly normal in a room that suddenly felt full of knives. Sirius's mouth twisted. "Still not dead. So better than some." Molly made a sound of warning. Sirius shrugged. "Sorry. Joke." He lifted the mug again, sipped, then looked around at them. "All right. I'm here. I'm wet. I'm hungry. And I assume you want something from me besides the pleasure of my company." Remus met his gaze. "We want to know what you've seen, what you've heard, what's changed." Sirius nodded, shifting into mission mode, the way he always did when emotional closeness got too dangerous. He spoke for 10 minutes, quick and sharp, giving information about ministry movements, whispers he'd heard, a name that might be a threat, a contact that might have turned. He didn't elaborate on how he knew these things. He never did. He expected them to trust him or disapprove silently. Either was acceptable. Hermione listened and took no notes, which was unusual enough that Sirius's eyes narrowed at least twice, as if he'd noticed her restraint and didn't understand it. When he finished, Molly set a plate of bread and stew in front of him. "Eat," she ordered. Sirius stared at the food. For a moment, his face looked almost young, almost uncertain. Then he snorted and began eating with the kind of speed that wasn't about hunger so much as habit. The kitchen settled into a fragile quiet. Then Creature appeared. He popped into existence near the sink, eyes fixed instantly on Sirius. For half a second, Creature didn't move. His entire body trembled, as though the sight of Sirius was a shock through old bones. Then he dropped into a bow, so deep his forehead touched the floor. "Master Sirius has returned," Creature croaked. Sirius froze mid-bite. His spoon hovered, his eyes narrowed, distrust rising fast. "Creature," he said slowly, as if tasting the word, "what are you doing?" Creature remained bowed. "Serving Master Sirius, protecting Master Sirius, protecting the noble house." Sirius's mouth tightened. "Don't call it noble." Creature's body shook. "Yes, Master Sirius." Remus felt the air in the room change again. Creature's tone was too obedient, too smooth. It sounded like fear wearing manners. Sirius set the spoon down carefully. "Right," he said. "This is new. Last time I was here, you were spitting on my shoes and calling me a blood traitor." Creature's eyes flickered up, watery and bright. "Creature does not spit on Master Sirius. Creature obeys." Sirius's gaze sharpened. "Who told you to obey?" Creature flinched, and Remus's heart sank because he could see it. The conflict inside the elf tightening like wire. "Mistress said," Creature began. Sirius's voice went cold. "Stop." Creature jerked as if struck. His hands flew to his ears. "Bad Creature. Bad for speaking." Sirius stood so abruptly his chair scraped. "No," he snapped. "Don't do that. Don't punish yourself." "Who's making you punish yourself?" Silence. Creature shook. Sirius's eyes flicked around the room, taking in their expressions, and Remus felt the danger spike, because Sirius noticed too much. Some things happened here, Sirius said quietly. Molly's voice came out too fast. Nothing. Hermione went very still. Ginny looked down. Remus held Sirius's gaze carefully, trying to keep his own face neutral. Sirius's eyes narrowed. Nothing is a lie. Molly's cheeks flushed. We've been cleaning. Sirius's mouth twisted. Cleaning. His gaze slid past them toward the doorway, toward the staircase, toward the upper floors, as if he could feel the house above him like weight. He said, very softly, almost to himself, "You went into my rooms." Molly's voice sharpened. "We had to make the house usable." Sirius's eyes turned hard. "That wasn't the question." Hermione's throat worked. "We only cleaned the main areas." Sirius stared at her. "Then why does Creature look like he's seen a ghost?" Creature whimpered and bowed lower, pressing his face to the floor. "Master Sirius," Creature croaked. Creature kept sealed. Creature failed. Creature let blood traitors too close. Sirius's head snapped towards the elf. "What did you keep sealed?" Creature froze. His entire body went rigid. His eyes went wide with terror. He began slapping himself, fast, frantic. "Bad Creature, bad. Telling secrets," Mistress said. Sirius's voice cracked like a whip. "Enough." The word rang through the kitchen with authority that startled even Remus. House elf magic tightened around it, binding Creature to stillness. Creature's hands halted mid-air, trembling. Sirius stared down at him, breathing hard. "Look at me, Creature." Slowly, Creature lifted his head. His eyes were huge, wet, terrified. Sirius's voice was low now, dangerous in its calm. "What did you keep sealed?" Creature's mouth opened. Nothing came out, not because he didn't want to speak, because something in him physically couldn't. Remus saw the bind. Old commands layered over new ownership, knots of magic tied by a woman long dead, still cutting into a creature still alive. Sirius swore under his breath. Molly's voice trembled. "Sirius, don't." Sirius whirled on her. "Don't what?" "Don't ask questions. Don't notice. Don't want to know what's being done in my house while I wasn't here." Molly lifted her chin. "We've done nothing to hurt you." Sirius's laugh was sharp. "That's a bold claim." Hermione's hands curled into fists at her sides. She couldn't stand it. Remus could see it, the pressure behind her eyes, the words she wanted to spill, the urge to confess just to stop this moment from tearing them apart. But confession would be its own violence. Ginny took a step forward, voice tight. "Sirius, we cleaned. We found things, old things. We packed them away properly." Sirius's eyes flicked to her. "Packed them away." His voice softened slightly. "And you didn't tell me." Ginny's jaw clenched. "You weren't here." Sirius's gaze moved across each of them again. Sharper, more assessing. "You've all got guilt on your faces," he said quietly. "Like you've been doing something you know you shouldn't." Remus felt the secret press against his ribs. Molly's voice hardened. "Stop reading into things." Sirius stared at her. Then, abruptly, he turned and walked out of the kitchen. Remus stood immediately. But Sirius didn't slow. He moved down the hall with the kind of certainty that came from growing up here. He knew the house's angles. He knew its moods. He knew where it pinched and where it widened. They followed him, Molly first, then Remus, then Ginny and Hermione, and behind them, Creature scuttled, trembling, whispering in a hoarse panic. "No, Master Sirius. Not there. Not there." Mistress said sealed. Mistress said. Sirius climbed the stairs to the first floor without looking back. At the landing, he paused by the covered tapestry, and for a heartbeat his face went blank, as if he'd forgotten it existed. Then his mouth twisted into bitterness. Still there, he muttered. Molly didn't speak. She couldn't. Sirius kept going. Up to the second floor, down the corridor, to the bedroom. His childhood bedroom. He stopped inside the doorway, and Remus felt the room hold its breath. The furniture was cleaner, the air was less thick with dust. The books were arranged with a deliberate neatness that didn't feel like this house. Molly's hand was all over it. Sirius's gaze swept the room, then narrowed as if something inside him had begun calculating. He moved toward the bookshelf. Hermione's heart seemed to stop, visible in her posture. Ginny's eyes went wide. Molly's breath caught. Remus felt it too. The invisible pull toward the wall beside the shelf, the panel they had disguised. The ward that still hummed beneath the concealment charms. Sirius ran his hand along the bookshelf edge, fingers tapping once, twice, like a man searching for something he'd hidden and forgotten. Creature appeared at the doorway, wringing his hands. "No, Master Sirius, please," Mistress said. Sirius's voice went dangerously quiet. "Creature, leave." Creature froze. Sirius's eyes snapped to him. "Leave." Now, Creature's body shook, but he vanished with a crack forced by ownership and command, even if every old binding in him screamed against it. Silence. Sirius turned back to the wall. He didn't know where the panel was. They'd hidden it well. Hermione's charms blurred attention. Remus's ward softened perception. To anyone else, it would be nothing. But Sirius wasn't anyone else. He had built his life here. He had hidden things here. He knew the feel of this room, the way you knew the shape of your own bones. He stepped to the exact spot anyway, and he stopped. Remus felt the blood drain from his face. Sirius stared at the wood, as if he could see through it. Then his voice came out, barely audible. "Someone's been here." Hermione's throat tightened. Molly's hands clenched. Ginny's eyes filled with helpless anger. Remus forced himself to speak, because silence now would become its own confession. "We cleaned, Sirius," Remus said. "We made the house usable for meetings. That's all." Sirius's laugh was quiet and ugly. "That's all," he echoed. "You made the house usable." He turned slowly. His eyes were bright, but not with humor, with something like hurt sharpened into fury. "Did you go through my things?" Molly lifted her chin. "We packed away what we found properly. We didn't destroy anything." Sirius stared at her. "That wasn't the question." Hermione's voice cracked slightly. "Sirius, we—" He held up a hand, and Hermione stopped instantly, like she'd been trained. Sirius looked at Hermione now, and Remus saw something chilling in the precision of it. Sirius knew Hermione's tells. She didn't like being out of control. She didn't like uncertainty. If she'd been forced into secrecy, it would show. Hermione's hands trembled at her sides, betraying her. Sirius's gaze narrowed. "What did you find?" he asked quietly. Molly stepped between them, protective. "Nothing that concerns you." Sirius's eyes flashed. "Nothing that concerns me. In my own house. In my own room." Remus felt the moment tipping. Hermione looked like she might break. Ginny looked ready to start yelling. Molly looked ready to fight. And Sirius looked like he was about to do what he always did when he felt cornered. He was about to lash out until everyone backed away. Remus stepped forward, voice low and steady. "Sirius, we found evidence that this house hurt you. We found things no child should have lived with. We didn't mean to pry. We were trying to make this place safe." Sirius stared at him, expression unreadable. Then he smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Ah," he said softly. "Pity. Brilliant. That's exactly what I wanted. The Order's headquarters doubling as a shrine to my tragic childhood." Molly's face went tight. "That's not—" Sirius cut her off, voice rising. "Isn't it? Look at you all. You're standing here like I'm fragile, like I'm going to crack because you found some old toys in a cupboard. Hermione flinched. Remus's heart pounded because Sirius was circling the edge of the truth, close enough to make them all dizzy. Sirius's eyes snapped to Hermione. How many notes did you take, Granger? Hermione's throat tightened. None. Sirius's brows lifted. None. That's the first unbelievable thing you've said all night. Hermione's eyes shone. I promised. Sirius went very still. Promised who? Silence. It was a trap and they all knew it. Molly spoke first, voice firm, desperate. Sirius, stop. This isn't about... No, Sirius snapped. It's about people going through my life while I'm not here, and then deciding what I'm allowed to know. He turned abruptly and slammed his palm against the wall where the panel had been. Nothing happened. The concealment held, but the gesture felt like a threat anyway. Remus, he said, voice low and shaking with restrained rage. Did you vote for this? Remus's stomach dropped. Sirius knew him too well. Sirius knew how Remus made decisions. If a choice had been made collectively, Sirius would assume Remus had tried to control the harm. Remus didn't answer quickly enough. Sirius's eyes sharpened. You did, didn't you? Remus felt the secret burning behind his teeth. He could lie, he could keep the promise, but Sirius was standing in front of the wall that held his sanctuary, and the lie would not protect him. It would only make him feel crazier, like he was imagining the shift in the house, imagining the guilt in their faces. Still, telling him would be another violation. It would take the privacy they'd tried to restore and tear it open again, this time in his mind. Molly spoke, voice fierce. We didn't open anything bloodlocked. Hermione's head snapped toward Molly, shock flashing across her face. Ginny's eyes widened too. Remus felt the floor drop out from under him. Molly had just lied. Not well enough, not cleanly enough. But she'd tried to draw a line that would keep the worst secret contained. Sirius stared at Molly. Then he barked a laugh. Oh, that's interesting, he said softly. Very specific denial. Which means there is something bloodlocked. Molly's face tightened. Sirius's eyes flicked to Hermione again, and now his voice was almost gentle, which was worse. Hermione, did you break into something you weren't supposed to? Hermione's breath hitched. Remus could see it. She was going to confess. She was going to spill everything, because she couldn't stand the pressure of secrecy, and because she believed, still, that truth could heal. Remus stepped forward fast. Hermione, don't. Hermione turned to him, tears already in her eyes. Remus, he deserves to know. He deserves to have something that is his, Remus said quietly. Something untouched. And if we tell him, we take even that. Sirius's gaze snapped between them, sharp as a knife. What did you do? Ginny's voice cracked raw. Sirius, stop, please. We did something wrong. We know that. But telling you would only hurt you more. Sirius stared at Ginny like he didn't recognize her for a moment. Then his expression shifted, and Remus saw it. Behind the anger, behind the sarcasm, there was fear. Fear of being made small. Fear of being pitied. Fear of being owned. Fear that even now, even after escaping, he still didn't have control over what people knew about him. Sirius's voice was quiet. So you did find something. Molly's eyes shone. Sirius backed away from the wall, slowly, as if stepping away from a fire. He looked at them one by one. Remus, Molly, Ginny, Hermione. Then he said, very softly, if you cared about me, you wouldn't have gone looking. Hermione made a small sound like she'd been punched. Molly's voice broke. We were cleaning. Sirius's laugh was empty. Cleaning. Right. He turned and walked out of the room. Not storming, not shouting, just leaving. Shoulders tight, movements controlled. Like he was afraid that if he moved too quickly he would shatter. Remus followed him down the stairs, but Sirius didn't stop. He went into the drawing room and stood by the covered portrait of Walburga Black, staring at it like he could hear her voice even through the curtains. Then he spoke without turning. "So what now, Mooney?" Remus's throat tightened. "What do you mean?" Sirius's voice was flat. "Now you all carry some secret about me. You all sit in meetings and look at me and think you know something I don't. And you'll never tell me, because you'll tell yourselves you're protecting me, just like everyone always does." Remus's chest tightened because Sirius was right about the pattern, even if he was wrong about their intent. Sirius turned slightly, eyes bright with anger that was almost grief. "I didn't come back here to be studied," he said. "I came back here because it's supposed to be mine, because it's the only thing I have left that belongs to me." Molly's voice came from behind them, trembling. "It is yours." Sirius's laugh was bitter. "Doesn't feel like it." Hermione stepped forward, voice shaking. "Sirius, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We shouldn't have looked. We shouldn't have." Sirius's eyes cut to her. "And yet you did." Hermione flinched. Remus forced himself to speak, because if they didn't anchor this moment, it would poison everything. "Sirius," Remus said quietly, "we made mistakes. We crossed lines, but we resealed what we found. We protected what we shouldn't have seen. And we are trying to make sure no one else violates you the way we did." Sirius stared at him for a long time, eyes sharp and exhausted. Then he said, voice low, "You protected it." Remus nodded once. "Yes." Sirius's mouth tightened. "So there is something." Remus didn't answer, because answering would confirm what they were trying not to confirm, that Sirius had a sanctuary, a secret, a private piece of himself that they had touched. Sirius looked away first, jaw clenched. "Fine," he said, voice flat. "Keep your secret. Keep your guilt. Whatever makes you feel better." Molly's voice broke. "It's not to make us feel better." Sirius's eyes flashed. "Isn't it? Isn't that what this always is? People doing things for my own good so they can sleep at night." He turned toward the door. "I'm leaving," he said. Ginny's voice cracked. "Sirius, you can't just—" Sirius stopped in the doorway, shoulders tense. "Watch me," he said. Then he paused, and his voice softened a fraction, like something inside him was fighting. "Tell Harry I'm fine." And with that, he left the drawing room, footsteps disappearing down the hall, toward the back exit, toward the night. The house creaked. Remus felt it like a sigh. Molly sank onto the stairs, hands shaking. Hermione stood rigid, tears falling silently down her face. Ginny stared at the doorway like she wanted to chase him and hex him and hug him all at once. Remus stood still, feeling the weight of the secret press harder than ever. They had promised silence to protect Sirius's privacy. And yet, the silence had still hurt him. Because secrets didn't just live behind walls. They lived between people. After a long, aching moment, Creature appeared at the edge of the hall, eyes wide, trembling. "Master Sirius is angry," Creature whispered, voice raw with fear. "Master Sirius will go. Master Sirius will leave," Creature again. Molly looked up, exhausted and furious at once. "Creature," she said softly. "Stop. Stop blaming yourself." Creature's mouth twisted. "Creature must obey Mistress. Creature must—" Remus's voice was low, steady. "Creature, listen carefully. Sirius is your master, not Walburga, not the dead. Sirius." Creature shook, caught in old bindings. "Creature is torn." Remus stepped closer, and for once he let his voice carry more authority. Then choose. Creature's watery eyes flicked between them, and Remus saw it. The grief under the hatred, the fear under the obedience. Creature whispered, barely audible. Creature will protect Master Sirius. Molly's breath caught. Hermione wiped her face quickly, as if embarrassed to be seen crying. Ginny's voice was rough. Then do it. Protect him by not hurting him. Creature trembled, then bowed, lower than he ever had. Yes, miss. He vanished with a crack. The house settled into uneasy quiet. Molly stared at the door Sirius had left through. We lost him, she whispered. Remus's voice was quiet, careful. Not forever. Hermione's voice broke. He hates us now. Remus looked at the staircase, at the ceiling above, at the hidden room behind the wall, sealed and untouched again. Maybe, he said. Or maybe he's just hurt. And hurt makes him cruel. Ginny's jaw clenched. And we deserve it. Remus didn't argue. Because in some ways they did. They had crossed a boundary. They had tried to restore it. They had carried the secret like a burden. And still, it had slipped out in their faces, and their hesitations, and their careful denials, turning into the very thing Sirius couldn't tolerate. People acting like they knew him better than he knew himself. Molly stood slowly, wiping her hands on her apron, even though they were clean. We keep the promise, she said, voice firm with exhaustion. We never tell. Not now, not later, not ever. Hermione nodded, tears still shining. Ginny nodded too, face hard. Remus held their eyes and nodded once. Yes, and in the quiet that followed, Remus understood the bitter truth of it. They would carry this for the rest of their lives, not as a story to share, not as a mystery solved, but as a private weight they had no right to pick up and no way to put down. Upstairs, behind a wall that looked like any other wall, a small room painted with stars remained sealed. A letter lay under a river stone, still addressed to a future that never came. And the boy who had written it was now a man who had walked out into the rain, determined not to be owned by anyone's understanding. The house creaked softly, as if amused, or as if, for the first time in a long time, it had witnessed something different from cruelty. It had witnessed people trying and failing and still choosing not to make their failure someone else's burden.